I would like to warmly welcome every one of you, and I'm very glad and honored to host this conference here in our academy. Last year, you were so kind to choose our academy as a delegate of Euroclassica in Italy. And so now we are trying to do our best to be worthy of this choice. And you will experience also what is the life here in our academy. You can speak with our students so that you can know how they teach, how they learn Latin and Greek here, and not only the languages, but also literature and philosophy and all the ancient world. And besides, some of our young teachers will, in the afternoon, show in some workshops, show how we do here practically. And so it will be, I think, and I hope it will be something useful for everybody who teaches these languages, so that you can see another way of teaching Latin and Greek, that it is now quite gradually spreading throughout the world. And so thank you to everybody for coming here to the Academy Vivarium Novum, and I hope that your staying will be very pleasant and very fruitful. Thanks a lot.
Dear Euroclassica friends and colleagues, chers amis et collègues, salvete omnes, chairete pantes. Chers amis, depuis la création de notre fondation en 1991, nous connaissons tous notre livre anniversaire inégalé, nos statuts ont toujours été clairs. Euroclassica est une fondation bilingue où règne l'anglais et le français. Voilà une tradition de bilinguisme que, comme citoyen belge, j'ai toujours protégée pendant ma présidence et que je continuerai à défendre. Je suis donc ravi de constater que pas mal de présentations seront tenues en langue française. Bien sûr, il peut y avoir des obstacles, comme dans notre organisation en pleine expansion, l'anglais est plus commun pour la plupart des participants. Mais, chers amis, il y a des solutions pour tout ça. Et s'il vous plaît, n'hésitez pas d'utiliser le français dans les discussions ou demain pendant l'Assemblée générale. Entre amis, on se comprend toujours. Quidni etiam interdum latina, latine verba proferamus. Corda, fratres, atque sorores, comme l'a formulé Pascoli et comme nous avons écouté hier aussi. Ok, tripartita erit oratio mea. This will be a speech which consists of 3 points. So basically, I'd like to tell you first something about Euroclassica, about what we're up to, about what we are doing. Then there will be a short invitation, and then there will be something, of course, about the theme of this conference. And then there will be a short conclusion about Europe as it is nowadays, which means that basically it will be a speech in 4 parts, but I just said 3 because this is much more classic to say so. Okay, so here we go. First about Euroclassica. I always like to stress that we are, of course, an organization, but mainly and most importantly, a network. So here's the committee which got elected last year in the wonderful conference in Jena. I see that Bärbel has arrived by now too. But actually, we're all doing this as volunteers. So we don't have any secretary who gets paid for the work. We don't have any payment, wages for president, vice president, people taking care of finances, and so on and so on. This is all voluntary work. And that's how it needs to be. What we Basically, what we want to do is just provide this network and stimulate initiatives. Now, maybe I should have started with this slide and just ask you to take a few seconds or even minutes to have a look at it. Dear audience, have you ever been at a conference, ever attended a conference where you'll find delegates of no less than 28, if we count Belgium double, of no less than 28 European countries and regions? 28. We exist for more than 30 years now. We never had this before. And as you may realize, only last year, we finally, in the new statutes, managed to arrange also the statute of the so-called associated partners, who are always welcome to come. And as you can see, we also have, this includes the 28 associated partners coming, and I'm looking at Jadranka now. I know that for many years we have been thinking about having this association also for Bosnia-Herzegovina, and I know that Jadranka is working on this. Welcome, Jadranka, and we hope, of course, that these things can be arranged soon too. So, isn't this amazing? If you just think about networking, here are all the delegates of all these different countries. I did not yet mention that we, during these 3 days, will have more than 100 other participants coming. So also therefore networking, there's huge opportunities. There's really classicists and people loving classics from all over Europe coming. Now, I'll bring you to the 1st of May, or perhaps the 30th of April, when I got contacted by some journalists who wanted to have an interview with me about Euroclassica. And as it usually goes in journalism, I exactly got a few hours to prepare things, and then the interview needed to be there. And I thought, what I'm going to do, because I had a very busy day, how am I going to present Euroclassica in a few minutes in an interview to these people? And I'm not exaggerating now. It exactly took me 5 minutes to bring together everything which is on this slide. And Julien will help me, I guess, with the link. So just wait a minute, Julien. I knew that the first question would be about classics in my home country, which is Flanders. Belgium, though, as many of you may know, I teach in Manchester in the UK. So I thought, maybe first something about classics in Flanders. Just go to the first link. Okay. This is, of course, in Dutch, but I guess you will understand statistieken, which is, of course, statistics. There's a link there, which I will not show you now. It's full of numbers, of course. It's a bit complicated, but we have it. We have it up to the year 2023. Because the Flemish ministry is always a bit slower in these things, so 23, 24 doesn't exist yet, but we have it up to 23. This is thanks to the enormous work and efforts by my dear colleague Yuri Fak, whom I mention here, and whom some of you might remember still from 5 years ago for a conference in Antwerp. So this would be my first thought for you. Why don't you all, each of you for your country, just try to collect this material? So, which numbers of students, of pupils, are there in which grades of, we concentrated on secondary schools, but maybe there might be primary schools too, and so you can do a lot of things with this. So the basic statistics. If journalists come to you, that is mostly the first thing they want to know. Give us some numbers, give us some figures, and you always need to deliver them fastly, immediately. Otherwise, they will start searching and find all sorts of things which are not really right. So I think it's very important just to have this. So here my encouragement to all of you. Try to sort of establish these statistics for your own region, for your own country. Let's go back to the slide. Of course, I knew that these journalists were going to ask something about the, whatever that may mean, the situation of classics, whatever that may mean, all over Europe. And this is even more tricky, of course. How to come with statistical material there? Well, I could at least refer our journalists to the questionnaire, which is the second link, Julien. Okay, here it is. On our website, it's easy, you just click on things and then you'll find Situation of Classics in Europe, evaluation of the Euroclassica questionnaire 2019. This has been the huge work of our brave and ever diligent Florence. Where is Florence? She's too modest now. Hi, Florence. Thank you so much for all this work. One of the big results was that a good estimate might be that about 2 million of pupils all over Europe somehow study classics in secondary schools. And during the General Assembly tomorrow, Florence will just encourage you to do some further work on this. And I know that this is a basic tool. It's often already very difficult to find out about your own region, let alone for the whole of Europe. But at least there is something. And you can refer to it. Just go back to the slide, please. Yeah, another question, of course, is, okay, this is Euroclassica. What do you actually represent? And you can proudly tell, well, we have like, I guess something like 40, almost 40 countries being members of Euroclassica. But these journalists want to know more. And they need to know it right now, immediately, of course. So just go to the third link, Julien, which is again on our website. And this is the whole list, not only of our full members of Euroclassica, but also, if we scroll down, also of the associated partners, with the name of the organization, everything. If you want to have contact details, email addresses, Florence has them all. For obvious reasons, we just did not put them there on the website. But again, this is there. We're expanding each year. Not only did we get a new Italian delegate last year in the form of Vivarium Novum, but last year Georgia and Slovakia also joined Euroclassica as partner or as associated partner. Okay, let's go back to the slide. I have two more things to show to you and to these journalists. It would be easy, of course, to have a tool where you could easily find some information, some basics, some interviews, images, whatever, about the situation of classics, say, in Spain. For this we have, this is our fourth link, the map of Europe. Again, it's very easy. You just go to the website or you Google map of Europe, Euroclassica, it comes up immediately. This is a tool still in full expansion. And Peter must be somewhere here too. Hi, Peter. So Peter is working, of course, on this map of Europe. Again, my question, me almost begging you to take care of your country. So whatever you would have, for instance, for Flanders, Belgium, Flanders, we just put our website, Classica Vlaanderen, which I showed you already. People can go there. How wonderful would it be for a journalist if he or she could just click on one country and have all the basic information there? Again, one or two links might be enough. You don't have to put in like 100 documents. You can do so if you want to, but no one is going to read this on a first consultation. If you just take care of some basic links, this will be an even more wonderful tool than it is nowadays already. But we're working on it, and I believe this was and is a great ID, and like many great IDs, it's just a simple ID. Here, the map of classics in Europe. And just go once again to our slide. These journalists also asked, well, these are just numbers and links, but what if you want to have something like true stories an overview written by a specialist on, say, teaching of classics in Luxembourg. Well, I just refer you to the last link. So here is what I often call, together of course with our newsletter, one of our flagships, that is Cursor. It's again our very own Peter Glatz who takes care of this. If you just go to that other link, which you don't need to do now, but more information and all issues of the magazine Cursor, or you can click on it if you want to, just do so, Julia, then basically you will find all issues of Cursor online, free online access. Well, I can guarantee you that in the last 10 years, we have at least covered something like 20 countries. So you just browse through the Cursor issues and you will find one article on classics in Norway, classics in Luxembourg, whatever. And, by the way, the brand new issue just came out a week or two ago, and with his famous generosity, Peter will just distribute the new issue to those of you who are interested. And we had counted something like 50 participants. We should have known, of course, that when Luigi organizes things, it always gets bigger and bigger. So if you don't manage to get hold of a Cursor issue now, Peter will gladly send it to you. Isn't this wonderful? Again, I had like a full schedule the 1st of May. I woke up something at 7 o'clock, and it took me not more than a few minutes just to bring together these links. And I can guarantee you that the journalists were sort of happy with the information offered. So this was my first thought in my oratio tripartita, as you may recall, just the idea of what do we offer as Euroclassica. Let's go to the next slide, which is an invitation. Some of you, I hope most of you, will remember the magnificent Europatria book by our great Portuguese colleague and former president, Francisco de Oliveira. Afterwards, there also came out an Europatria book. What is Europatria about? Each country presents itself by, for Europatria, its Latin tradition. Latin texts about this country. Texts, that is of course the great thing of doing classics, texts that basically can go from antiquity up to the very recent period. It's all there. The Europatria book appeared already 10 years ago. If you just Google it, you can find it on several websites, free online access. So here's my invitation. We're going for a new Europatria book. And again, take a look at the countries named here, because these are countries that were not yet in the former Europatria of 10 years ago. So these countries, often new countries, and you see that we are really expanding also the idea of Europe, these countries are particularly invited, together with all others. So if you want to write, say, a new contribution on Latin in Germany, you can basically do so. I have sent several emails for this already. I'm working on this together with Bebel and with Frank. Where is Frank? Also somewhere here. Frank, who takes care of our finances. So we put a deadline there already. All delegates have received this invitation. This is going to be another great book. And we're going to go for free, open online access to a new Europatria. Okay, let's go to the third part, which is our conference. Next slide, please. Right. This is about, as you may have seen in the first slide already, nova et vetera. New things and old things regarding didactics of ancient Greek and Latin. So we will listen to presentations, again from presenters of all over Europe, about the way people in the past, sometimes in the rather distant past, dealt with teaching of classics. And we will hear about new, innovative teaching methods as they are practiced nowadays. Mainly methods that involve the living approach, but not exclusively. We're, of course, this is going to be a very practical conference. You can hear about many different approaches, so we're, of course, happy to hear about all sorts of innovative teaching methods. And I'm happy to say that we can do so in an environment which is really a dream becoming true. So I have known my dear friend Luigi for more than 25 years now already. And I remember that when we talked to each other in the 90s, he was dreaming about sort of project sort of in national school. I guess it was in Velia, Elea. Yeah? And then they went to Rome, and it was the first institute really in the city of Rome. And then I guess some 10 years ago now, yeah? This marvelous place, the Villa Falconieri, was found. And just look at this. If you come home and you tell people about what you experienced here, about what you saw here, there's a chance that they won't even believe it. So it's really this dream becoming true, and it's, I guess, an ideal environment to hear about nova et vetera, new and older teaching methods. By the way, next slide, please. Talking about old, this is a question I mainly have for our Scandinavian colleagues. Could you go to the next slide? Oh, I can perhaps do it myself. Yeah, okay, here we are already. This is interesting. Just by Googling, I found out that the method about which we will hear later on by the Danish scholar Hans Öberg was actually belonging to a sort of Natuurmethodes Sprog Institute in Denmark. And that this method was actually applied to several languages. It's very hard to find out now, but in the 50s and the 60s, there were similar methods, nature methods, to learn and to teach, for instance, French, English, I guess Danish also. There's a Russian one too, as far as I remember. Would be interesting to find out something about this, but it seems to be very hard to find because only the Öberg method really survived for Latin, but there's at least this website which I've showed to you here now. Okay, this was me as a classicist speaking with 3 elements, of course, but I just wanted to end with a sort of bit of a personal final thought, which is about Europe. The idea of Europe. As some of you may know, I happen to travel a lot, and I usually take my travel time to read. And I just want to tell you something about an excerpt I read in one of my favorite authors, Joseph Roth, in his Vlucht ohne Ende. So really about being a sort of fugitive for the whole of your life. So one day, the main character, who's called Tunda, he asks, well, what is this? You are always speaking about European civilization. Can you tell me what this means? And I will now paraphrase what Joseph Roth says. So there's actually a president, and he says, European civilization is all about religion. But this is a guy who never ever goes to church himself. Then there's a lady. She says, European civilization, it's all about decent behavior, elegance. And everyone knows that she has boyfriends everywhere, of course. Then there's a diplomat saying, European civilization, it's all about art. And everyone is laughing because this guy had not been to a museum since he was a teenager. Another one would say, it is just about the idea of Europe. But no one really understands what he wants to say with this. And there's another guy saying, you just have to read my publications about it. And they say everything you'd like to know. And Tunda says, really, I don't want to read all of this, and I don't want to hear all these talks. And then he has this thought. He says, if you want to have the ideal of European civilization, you have to make this a sort of living community. You sort of have to practice also this humanity. If not, it's just vain and idle words. So in a way, Joseph wrote, who had a pretty interesting life, as you may know, in the beginning of the 20th century. Joseph Roth makes this point that if European culture is not a lived reality, it doesn't mean anything. I think this is an interesting thought, perhaps, as a conclusion. And my personal input would be here just the mention or the remembrance, if I may say so, of the Albanian author Ismail Kadare, who died on the 1st of July this year at a rather advanced age. Kadare is basically an author whom I like a lot. Of course, I had to read everything he did in translation, because he mainly writes in Albanian, which unfortunately I cannot read. But these books are full of thoughts of European heritage and culture. If you just want to start with one, I'd recommend The General of the Dead Army. That is really a beautiful book. And for Ismail Kadare, European civilization really means the combination of many different elements. It's full of Greek culture. So his books are full of allusions to, references to Greek culture. It's very difficult to read Kadare if you don't know about Greek mythology, for instance. But there's the Roman element. Of course, as you know, Albania is pretty much between East and West. There's the Turkish Ottoman element. There's this so special, as I always find it, Balkan experience, which is really expressed also in his book. It's really a Europe which looks both at the East and the West. It's really a Europe which includes very contemporary things. Kadare was always sort of fighting somehow secretly also the communist regime of Enver Hoxha. But at the same time, it's also looking at the past. It is looking at Nova, at Vetera, and I think this would be a nice idea just to conclude my introductory words, because of the fact that for Vivarium Novum, classical civilization is so much more than only Greek and Latin, and is so much more than only the Greek and Latin language. And by the way, this last slide reminds me of the idea that we urgently need to have an Albanian delegacy also here in Euroclassica. Thanks for listening. Unfortunately, I'll have to stay here because I'll also take part in the next presentation, which is now basically not about introduction, not especially about Euroclassica, but about a project. I almost said a book, but it's going to be much more than a book, a project which includes the teaching of classics. Mind you, not only in Europe, but worldwide, all over the world. And I'm happy to give the floor now to two distinguished colleagues and good friends too. There's Dr. John Bulwer, who is of course honorary president, former president of our very own Euroclassica, and who has a marvelous teaching career in Europe, so not just in the UK. I remember that John has been involved in European school projects, amongst others in Brussels, which means that his French is really excellent too, as we have experienced many times already. John has always been the language reviewer of many of the Euroclassica projects too. So John will be the first speaker as one of the editors of the book. And Stephen Hunt, who is professor of didactics of ancient Greek and Latin at the most famous, well-reputed University of Cambridge, is the other editor and will be the other speaker. I'm always pretty impressed, not only by the publications of Steve Hunt on classics, but also by his being very active on social media. He's really a promoter of classical studies. He's the editor-in-chief also of the Journal of Classics Teaching. And these two scholars, so John and Stephen, just brought together an amazing collection, to say so, of chapters, and they managed to motivate so many people all over the world for this book. Steve, John? So we will first start just with a small PowerPoint presentation, some images regarding the book, and then there will be a sort of questions and answers interview. Can I?
Yes, we'll move on to that, yeah.
So the title of the book, the website, the whole project will be Teaching Classics Worldwide, subtitled Successes, Challenges and Developments. And it will be out early next year, so 2025, with well-reputed editor, publishing house, Bloomsbury. So unfortunately, we do not yet have a copy of the book, but of course, we want to see, Stephen and John, how it looks like, so perhaps you can show us the cover already on a slide. I can do this for you too. Yeah, so here we go. This will be the book. And if you are in a bookshop, you sort of see this cover, of course, and this is, well, rather special. It's rather peculiar. So here comes my first question for you, John or Stephen. Just explain the cover. What is this? Why did you choose this one?
Well, there is the cover, and it recalls a vase of Ezekias, the two warriors playing a game. This all began when Steve got in touch with me and said that he had an idea to update the volume that I produced in 2006, which was about Europe. And this was 2006, a long time ago, and was getting out of date. And I thought, yes, this is a good idea to update the book that had come out then. And then he said, oh, I think we should extend it a little beyond Europe. And I said, oh, okay. Yes, we'll try to cover the whole world. So this was the ambitious project that began some time ago. So covering the world rather than just Europe led us to this cover picture. Could I have the next slide? There is the original 6th century amphora by Exekias. There is another version as well that's in the Louvre. And it recalls these images. And they are by the New Zealand artist Marion Maguire. So classics in New Zealand, really the other side of the world. You can't get much further away. And yet her images put Greek images, Greek vase pictures, into an Antipodean landscape, a New Zealand landscape from the other side of the world. So we thought about asking Marion if we could use one of her pictures. We thought first of all about the one in the center. There's the mountains, the vegetation of New Zealand. And if you look very closely in the tree on the left-hand side, your left, there is a figure of Captain Cook, the British explorer who came to the islands in the 18th century, and he's tied up in that tree on the left, while the two Greek soldiers completely ignore him. In the end, we went for the one that is on the far left, which is on the cover of the book. And this is another complication. The Greek soldiers are replaced by Socrates on the right, and Tito Kawaru on the left. And this is from a series called Tito Kawaru's Dilemma. Now, he is a figure from New Zealand native history, and there's a bit of legend attached to him as well, but he was a native Maori inhabitant of New Zealand before the European arrival, and she shows him in discussion with Socrates. Perhaps they're talking about civilization, about peace, about colonialism, about all kinds of things. So we thought this image reflected the spreading out of the classical world all over, reaching just about as far away as we could possibly get. So, can we have the next slide? This is a map covering the places that are included in the book. Perhaps I'll hand over to Steve to introduce that one.
Yes, so one of the things that we found in terms of accessing information from people was that some people were very easy to find. Euroclassica was, of course, an excellent place to start with people who'd already written for John in his previous book and who were easy to track down through Euroclassica's website and that. Others were slightly less easy and depended quite a lot on personal connections. So I have personal connections with a number of people in Australia and with America, and they were very willing to help out. And I thought, well, that's it. That's nice and straightforward, isn't it? And then I did something that perhaps I should have done right at the start and looked at a map of the world and tried to identify which countries there were which I hadn't considered. And with that kind of dawning realization that there are, I know this sounds stupid, but there are an awful lot of countries in the world which I had simply assumed didn't have any classics education at all. So I started looking carefully at organizations like FIAC, the Fédération, and other contacts, and it's what one describes as, in research terms, as a snowball effect. You ask, and someone else refers you on to somebody else, and refers you on to somebody else. And one of the reasons this book took quite a long time to put together was partly because COVID intervened, but partly also because finding people who were willing and able to write was not perhaps quite as easy as we thought. But that means to say that the people that we have got to contribute have been really committed to the project, and really very, very grateful for all of them who did so. Some of the things about this map are quite interesting. I had not expected there to be quite so much in the right-hand end of the world. I hadn't expected there very much to be so much in the south end part of the world. And call me naive, but that is what I found. And actually, when compiling this and putting this map together, and of course editing the book itself, it was extremely gratifying to find out that in fact classics was not just confined to Europe and a few sporadic countries, but was actually living quite nicely and quite well all over the place. It's different in different countries, of course. In South America, one of the main things seems to be that at the secondary school level, apart from one or two honorary exceptions, it's mostly at the university level. And I think we'll probably talk a little bit later about how that impacts on the uptake of classics in those countries. The other interesting places, of course, are China and Japan, where they have another very distinctive approach to what might be going on in the way of learning the ancient languages and about the ancient world in general. South Africa and the southern part, well, the whole of Africa really, has some very interesting tales to tell, which we can read about in the book, obviously, but Christian might ask us some further questions about that. There's one gap, which I apologise for, but it was about joining two pieces of map together, and that is Hawaii, which is the join in the map and does have classics. So there should be a spot in the middle of the Pacific Ocean for Hawaii. Do you want to carry on?
Okay.
Of course, we're very curious. You already sort of mentioned it, but do you have some nice anecdotes or some funny stories about you finding particular contributors? So you mentioned the networking already and the one referring to the other, but there must have been some surprises perhaps or unexpected contributors?
Well, I was surprised, I think, by the South American, the extent of contributions that came in there, and reading the chapters, the depth of the history of classical study in, what have we got, Venezuela, Colombia, we didn't manage to get contributions from everybody we asked, but those ones that came in, Bolivia was one, wasn't it? Brazil, there's a lot of activity. So we don't have so much contact in Euroclassica from that area, so perhaps that was surprising to me. And looking through the references for China, the depth of scholarship, the dictionaries, the complications of actually establishing the study of Greek and Latin in Chinese. What do you actually use to deliver your teaching? That kind of thing. Any other? Yeah.
In terms of stories about sourcing information, it was very interesting. One of the things I found with the book, we asked everybody to write almost to a format. We asked them to write about the numbers, if they had it, the relative status of the subjects, whether there was more language work or more literature work or whatever it might be. So we tried to ask to a format, and some people stuck to that. Other people found the format didn't quite match. But even within that format, there's quite a distinctive voice from each of the people who represent their countries. It's always, as an editor, you kind of make a choice. Do you want to smooth everything down so it all sounds and looks the same? Or do you want to let those individual voices shine? And we decided that actually we wanted to let the voices come out because that was part of the cultural dimension of which the subject is taught. You can't turn Latin and Greek into this international language, these international languages, which is what they are, without hearing the individual voices about how people choose to do them. And so although there was a format, we let people have their head, as it were, and represent their work in ways which are different from each other. And I think that comes across rather nicely. Some of the papers, some of the articles are, oops, that's so nice, there's a butterfly, it must be a good sign. Some of the articles are quite strident, some of them are quite gentle. They are all, most of them, pretty darn positive about the status of their subject, but also inquisitive and inquiring about what their futures are. But looking at a couple of interesting stories, one of the things about, John's already mentioned the Chinese one, and that was a really interesting one because the author decided to involve a number of other people in compiling the chapter. So Qiang Li basically got a student of his and a teacher to write sections. And that, again, different voices within the same chapter is interesting, and it gave people other sorts of ways of thinking about the subject within their countries. And I think that's really good. Other places where there aren't any languages anymore, for example, New Zealand has lost teaching Latin and Greek. Denmark doesn't have Latin and Greek. Were more circumspect and more positive, obviously, about how they use non-linguistic or translation literature in their schools. And I think there are lessons to be learnt there across the world for those countries where the languages are perhaps not as, I'm going to say viable, in terms of the desperate financial problems that lots of places are in, other ways of teaching or getting access to the classical world. There are two silly points, and I have to say I put them both in. Perhaps I should have left them out. But I discovered that there was Latin taught for a moment in Antarctica, and also that there is Latin on the moon, which is a kind of silly thing, but it had to be mentioned. A lot of the countries which are mentioned on that map just there didn't have a huge amount to say. And therefore, at the end of each of our sections, each of the sections is about a continent, effectively. Each of those sections finishes with some further reading, with the kind of snippets of information that John and I were able to find, many of which are just personal communications, where people, as it were, rang in, phoned in and said, there's not a great deal going on, but I do have this. And those personal connections, I think, are really important because although they don't have full chapters to themselves, they do indicate the, what's the word I'm looking for? They indicate the absolute determination in some countries and in some individual schools in countries to actually keep classics alive. And I think that's really worth hearing as well. So, though there may be some countries which have beautifully well-formed chapters saying everything is wonderful and everything is running fine, there are quite a few chapters where there's a little bit more personality and a little bit more care and a little bit more anxiety sometimes about classics in their countries. And what we hope this book will achieve is that people will look across and see what works well in one place might be transferable to another.
Thank you so much for these insights. So I'm now going to act as the journalist I mentioned in my talks. So they always want to know about specific points, and they want to know, like, to have like the general picture. So if, I know this is a hugely difficult question, but if I were to ask you, what are the main themes, the main issues, the main points that arise for classics all over the world, worldwide, what would you mention as main points?
Yes, perhaps if we just move to the next slide, have a look at the contents as well. Yes, we do have several contributing authors in the audience, so they will be in this list, and we would like to thank those contributors very much for their hard work and their patience and perseverance, sometimes in difficult circumstances, to get these things in and to put up with our editing and sending them back and saying, can we have your corrections by tomorrow, that kind of thing. So this is Europe A to G, and Austria, Bosnia-Herzegovina are here, aren't they? Bulgaria, Croatia, Finland, France, Georgia, Germany, they're all here. So perhaps the next one. And that's G to R. So we were pleased to get a contribution from Hungary and Iceland. And we've got our Euroclassica regulars here, and including Poland as well. We had made good contacts with Poland, who are members, well, they're related to Euroclassica, but we don't often see them.
I guess the only non-member is Iceland so far.
Yes, well, very interesting chapter from Iceland, and the next one. Just to finish off.
Doesn't work.
Okay. No. Well, we are sorry we can't actually show you a copy of the book. But oh, okay. Oh, that was all of Europe. Okay, so let's pause there for the moment. We do have proof copies, 2 copies here. So if you'd like to see your chapter, what it looks like in the proof stage, then that is available here. The date, we're in the hands of the publishers and the printers, the date we've been given is February 2025, but everything is completed and with the publishing house. Now, sorry, main themes that Christian asked about. One thing that arose in several chapters was the presence of STEM subjects and the emphasis put on those science, technology, engineering and mathematical subjects. Many national governments, national education systems seem to be promoting this area of study, and many authors mention that this is a difficulty for recruitment in the humanities generally, and in classical subjects in particular. They also mention recruitment to subjects and retention, getting pupils to start choosing to study classical subjects and the languages, and then keeping them in the option systems right up to the final examinations. And we are talking about beginning studying the languages or classical subjects wherever that takes place. So frequently that is, particularly in Europe, that is in secondary school, but it may be earlier, there may be some primary school input. There's a very interesting chapter from Brazil about that. It may be a higher level at beginning university for the languages. So that's the focus of the whole thing. Many authors bring up the question of usefulness, that seems to be the criterion of choice of why people choose to do a particular subject. What use will it be? And that recurs in many places. So it may be that we, promoting classics, need to focus on other aspects of a humanities education that are not simply directly useful for a job, that doing this is good for something else. Why not emphasize what is good in itself of studying a particular subject? Active Latin, which we will be focusing on, came up in many chapters. The most quoted source material, didactic material, the book to learn from, was Orberg's Lingua Latina. That is clearly now in widespread use over many different countries. And it was quite interesting to see what course books each country uses, and it may be that it's uneconomic, hasn't been possible to produce, say, a Latin, a beginner's Latin book in a particular language. So some of you may be well used to this. You use a book from somewhere else. And we have, I think, managed to collect quite a good range of material and to see how those course books actually are used and which ones they are. I thought learning of ancient Greek doesn't come out all that well. That actually doing Greek language classes is something that a lot of chapters report on finding difficulty in starting those up. And I thought that we could detect a move to studying cultural aspects of the ancient world, even in specifically language courses. That it may be Latin that you're teaching, but what is proposed is not just a course of Latin grammar and vocabulary, but an introduction to the ancient world through the learning of the language and using the language as an insight into the study of the history, the culture, and so on.
Yes, if I may just pick that thread up a little bit. I think one of the really interesting things is that when you say Latin to most people outside this room, say, or outside of our classrooms. Most people don't know what it is, or they associate it with a pedagogical approach, or they might associate it with a language, but most of them don't really know what it is, what we actually do. And I think one of the things that comes out of this book is there are some areas which have a very clear understanding of what I describe as the symbiotic relationship between learning language and culture at the same time. So you learn the language in order to be able to find out about Roman culture. You learn Latin to learn about Roman culture, and you learn about Roman culture to help you with your language. The two work together. And I think there's a growing realization that the literature and the culture, the material culture side of things is not to be seen as an add-on, a thing to do in your spare time, a bit of a thing to finish off the lesson with, or to do on Thursday afternoons, but is to be more integrated with the language learning. Partly because that is, I have to say, probably the energizing thing for students in our classes. They want to find out about Romans and Greeks, but partly also because in terms of learning languages, language is a culture, and we need to know the culture as well to understand the language. I think that's one thing that's coming through, and some of that is evidenced by quite a lot of the organisations and the contributors in the book to talk about how they engage students outside the classroom with cultural visits to museums and sites. That has increased in ground. Having read John's book in 2006, it was something that happened occasionally and seems now to be much more widespread about the value of visits to sites and museums. And every place in Europe, certainly, and quite a lot of places elsewhere, have some cultural remains, even if they're just in a museum, to go and visit. The other thing that John also talked briefly about was active approaches. Very popular in America, although not widespread as perhaps you might think, not perhaps as widespread as you might think. But it is popular because in the States, the examination system doesn't require it. I mean, there is basically little of a nationally agreed examination system in the States, which means to say that in schools, teachers can play to their students' strengths. And there is a real interest in using more active approaches there. And that has percolated through into the UK through being the same language, let's face it. English is differently spoken, but pretty much the same between the States and the UK. And through social media, there's an experimentation with slightly more active approaches in the UK. But our examination system is what I might describe as rather oppressive and rather traditional and moves very slowly. Research, well, people suggest really that in 7 years' time, the examination system might catch up with what we are doing in the classroom. And that is a problem that we have to try to persuade examiners, not just that this is a flash in the pan, interesting experiment, but that actually active Latin is a considered and worthy inclusion in our everyday curricular practices. And the final thing really that I wanted to draw attention to was those countries which had lost Latin and the languages. And again, I point to Denmark and I point to New Zealand. Denmark has a very strong tradition of getting students to embed and learn about ancient philosophy through Aristotle in their curriculum. And as Edith Hall in the UK would advocate, it's something that every child could learn about and every teacher could teach, because it requires no specific training to teach somebody how to teach something in translation. And that's the problem that we have in the UK, not Edith Hall, but the problem in the UK is that if we wish our subject to expand, it's finding the teachers to teach it. And that's one of the aspects which I think comes through quite strongly across the whole book, is we are very happy to teach it, but there aren't enough of us. And finding more of us and training us up to be able to do it is a real problem. I'm lucky in the UK in that we have a pretty established teacher training programme. So there are 3, 4, 5 places in the UK where you can train to be a specialist classics teacher. And I teach them in Cambridge. And over the whole of the UK, we train up about 70 teachers every year. But that doesn't match the 250 jobs advertised every year, and the more being the schools who might want it but simply cannot source a teacher. And that is a problem that exists throughout the world. There are not enough teachers being trained, and those teachers who are being trained sometimes find it difficult perhaps to adapt to the classrooms that they're in because their students are not quite like they were. I know that when I was a teacher, I was surprised that the students in my class didn't want to learn quite in the way that I did. And I was quite surprised that the way that I had learned didn't quite fit with the way that they were learning. Now, I'm nearly 60 now, and I've watched Latin teaching professionally for a very long time, 30, 40 years. And it has changed dramatically. And the thing that has changed most of all has been the introduction of online resources, on digital media, and all of those things. And we haven't mentioned the elephant in the room. Maybe Christian is going to mention it now, but the elephant in the room being AI. I feel completely out of my depth on AI. As much as any teacher might have felt 20 years ago when the internet came up, and you have to adapt. So I think those two things are intertwined. On the one hand, we want more members of staff because we want our subject not just to survive, but thrive and maybe even expand. But a lot of our students know an awful lot more about the way that they learn than we do. And we need to take cognizance of that and not just keep up with them, but anticipate the demand that they will lead with.
Thank you so much. Isn't this amazing? So for those of you who are taking notes, I just recognize things that you find, well, I'd say, in all countries. So if I just summarize, so this was about what are the main issues. So STEM subjects, then recruitment, how to find teachers, usefulness, is it really useful to learn Latin and Greek? What about active approaches? What about the decline of ancient Greek? And then what about culture, in-language courses, moving to more cultural courses, integrating culture into language, and so on and so on. I think with every single teacher you basically speak about teaching of Latin and Greek, this comes up. And so wonderful to hear that these are the main tendencies you also found in your book. Okay, let's go to the anecdotal again. Were there any, apart from Latin on the Moon, were there any other real surprises?
Do you have a surprise?
Just one or two.
John has a surprise. Go on.
Oh yes, there are some countries that still require Latin for medicine and for law. That was a surprise that there was compulsory Latin courses for entry to those faculties. We were very pleased with the spread of the European net that we managed to bring in countries that were a bit new. I was surprised that, picking up on the point about AI, that new technology didn't feature quite as much as I thought it might in the overall, looking through the whole span of the chapters. But I would recommend the last chapter there, Steve's chapter on informal and online learning. It is the last one, and I think the tendency will be to pick out chapters here and there where I'm quite interested in this place, and that sounds good. But there are rewards in reading through the whole thing, and particularly getting to the last chapter, which I think does point the way ahead and raises those kinds of questions. So I would recommend reading right to the end if you can.
Can I just add something on the informal learning? I guess all of you will recognize this. Like, let's say 20, 25 years ago, what would have been the only Latin a pupil heard? The Latin pronounced by the teacher, not? That was it. Now you just open the internet, it's everywhere. You can hear all these different ways also of pronouncing the language. You can basically hear every single language you want. You can hear it, you can read it, it's all there. And so I think this is really a new world, not just for classics teaching, but just for language learning, also for minority languages and so on and so on. There's so many opportunities there, so we're really looking forward, Stephen, to read that last chapter too. The following question might have a very brief answer. Of course, we're looking forward to it. Already at breakfast, we mentioned books and the future of books, in which I guess we can say we strongly believe. But following on from the publication, are there other plans?
Well, there will be an attendant website, and what we hope is that there are a number of places which haven't been able to contribute, and we're hoping that people will read the book and say, my country is not represented here, I need to put something in, rather than wait for the second edition, which will be probably in about 10 years' time, or longer, if ever. If anybody has or knows somebody who has a chapter to write, or even just a few thousand words, to either make additions or to update or to say, here's a country you haven't considered, then we hope to be able to put that on a website. And maybe Euroclassica can be the place for something like that.
Why not?
The other thing is that we gathered together an enormous amount of information. I started off with, as I said, I was naive to start off with. In my view, I just wanted, with John Bulwer to kind of repeat the book and his book and enlarge it and update it. But it turned into something I think that was more valuable. I don't mean to just disrespect John's first book, but more valuable in a way, because it contains information about contacts, organizations, textbooks, models of learning, and the issues of pedagogy, which are partly communal and partly specific to different countries. But it's a wealth of information. And so I think it will provide a really good resource for anybody who's interested in classics education. If they want to find out who is the person to contact in country X, they will be able to find that person's name or that organisation and, with politeness, no doubt, contact them and make some use of it. And I think it's a kind of almanac, really, of classics education. The thing that also needs to be done in the future is, the website itself we hope to contain information that has been missed off, but also a list of places to go to, so organisations, for national organisations to find out about classics in different countries. But I see there's no point in trying to replicate what Euroclassica is doing, so we need to obviously think carefully about that, duplicate. I'm very interested in how digital media are affecting the teaching of classics. We started writing this book as AI became more widely used. I just came back from a conference in Australia about teaching using AI, and I know that it's something that is going to affect every single one of us today and in the future. It's not going to go away. It's not going to make our lives any easier in some ways. In fact, it's going to make them slightly more difficult. We're going to have to think really carefully about how we police it and how we get students to use it responsibly, and even academics using it responsibly. Christian and I were talking about this morning over breakfast, about how AI is going to, already does influence the way that academics source material, read material. For example, CUCD, just a little plug for the Council of University Classics Departments in the UK, is just about to publish a small series of articles about the use of AI in the university sector, and with some contributions there, and I hope to be writing a little bit for that as well. But I think that's going to be a massive area of interest. Digital textbooks. In the UK, we're blessed with a number of digital textbooks or digital versions of textbooks which are widely used and which have very, very much affected the pedagogical approaches which people use in their classrooms. So the display of text on the board, the use of digital parsing tools, the use of moving images, the creation of different sorts of reading resource are part and parcel of what we do in the classroom. One of the things that I was really interested in from the conference I just came back from was one member of staff was using self-created texts of a source of a topic that he personally was interested in, and having AI tier them, i.e. make them at different levels of complexity, different levels of syntactical complexity, because the original AI version was too hard for him. So he asked it to tone it down a bit until he found the level that he wanted to improve his reading of Turkish, some language he personally wanted to learn to read. And the conversation I had with him went along the lines of this. How would you feel as an academic or as a teacher if you knew that your students were taking texts and manipulating them in those ways at home and he said, get better. I said, yes, that's the point, isn't it? To get better. I see a lot of teachers using text to test students from. The text is a means of testing students' understanding of vocabulary, syntax, whatever. We should be using our text as something to learn from, and we should be letting go of our text so that students can manipulate them in ways that suit them for learning from until they arrive at the original text. How they get from that starting point to the original text where we want them to be is going to be the challenge for us as pedagogues. How do we provide the resources and let the students have the independence to actually think for themselves about how they learn, but give them the challenge and the end point where we know that they've got there? That's going to be hard. Letting go. As teachers, we don't like to do that.
I think that letting go would already be the topic of a whole conference on its own. So really, that's a good point, an interesting point. Thank you very much. My other question for both of you would be about integrating local archaeology in language course books. If I think of the UK, there's many books which brilliantly managed to do this, because of course there are these museums, there is this local archaeology. But when I think about the country where I spent 2 years of my academic career, namely Finland, there's much less Roman or Greek local archaeology. So from a worldwide perspective, how do writers of handbooks deal with this? So with local archaeology, and what if there is not so much or no local archaeology for classics?
Yes, that was something I picked up on in a number of chapters. I think the new course that Frank Collot is developing in Luxembourg was one, and Peter Glatz's Austrian course that we were presented with last year. They were remarkable in their use of the local presence of resources, museums, and the history there. So yes, there are others throughout the chapters that show a similar kind of idea. Afraid I don't have any recommendations as to what you should do if you are a long way away, like in New Zealand, and yet there is a very fine collection of Greek vases in Christchurch Museum in New Zealand. So there's always something, I think. How long have we got? We've just got. I'd just like to mention some of the controversies that perhaps are coming up and that different people are facing.
So that would really be indeed our very last question, which is an important one too. about which we should speak openly too, and I did so a few years also in the context of Euroclassica. So there's all sorts of controversies going on nowadays too about the teaching of classics and the value of classics. And I think we should just be very open about this and discuss this. So that would be really my very last question for both of you. Can you just pinpoint some current controversies and how they are dealt with in the contributions?
Yes, one thing that does emerge, I think, is that a controversy, counter-arguments, difficulties that one country faces may not be at all replicated in another. So what may appear to be an all-consuming question, like decolonization, for example, in the United States, decolonizing the curriculum is a big thing, and that classics falls into an area that is European, is white, is elitist, is difficult, and dominates the curriculum and positions of power, and how is that all to be changed? That is a very current area of debate. This may not be replicated somewhere else, but we do face that, and in fact the chapter here from Zimbabwe by Obert van Lambo is a very good example of facing up to that question. This is Southern Africa. What part does education in Latin and Greek have to do with that part of Africa? And that chapter deals with the question, I think, in a very balanced and restrained way. The question of elitism crops up quite a lot. That is mentioned in many chapters, that this is a subject for the better off, all kinds of class questions, racial questions can come into this as well. We haven't got long, so the difficulty of languages, of Latin and Greek, of learning, and these are seen as difficult subjects. It's more challenging to gain a good mark in an examination. This is a perception in some places. So you choose the easier question. The teachers recommend pupils to choose the easier option where they will get a better mark. How do we face up to that? Should courses in classics at university level have a requirement for language study? Can you really study classical subjects at a high level without knowing the languages? This is quite a burning question as well, as is the importance of non-linguistic classical civilization courses as opposed to the ones with the languages. Is it a second-rate classics to do it without the languages? Those are things that we should be thinking about, I think, and they are raised in many of the chapters. Anything do you want to add?
Yes, I mean, I think this probably doesn't apply in most of the countries, but the very word classics is, in some places, problematic. I don't need to go into all the details of the ramifications of that particular word. But in the UK, for example, we have a differentiation between, at university level, something called classics and something called classical studies or classical civilization or ancient world studies. Classics involves the languages, literature and civilization. Classical civilization doesn't. And that is something which is very pertinent in the UK and less prominent, I think, in other places in the world, where, for example, study of the ancient world forms part of the history curriculum, and study of Latin forms part of the languages curriculum. And therefore the way in which the subjects are studied as part of different curricular setups doesn't problematize what it's called when you get to university. The other problem, of course, is how do you attract students? This is the big challenge and maybe a controversy, is how do you attract students into doing it in the first place? And there are many places where if you're in the right school or in the right district or you're wealthy enough, you will be doing classics, you'll be doing Latin as part of your standard school curriculum. But for those who are left out, the ones who didn't go to the right school or who were not in the right district or who weren't wealthy enough to attend the school which offered it in their local area, should we be ignoring them? Or should we be finding ways in which we can invite them into it? If classics is so darn good, why are we not making it available to everybody? And we should therefore ask ourselves, and I think quite a lot of the chapters ask themselves, if the subject is so good, what is preventing us, apart from money and apart from teachers, what are we doing that's not getting students through our doors, and what can we do about it? Now, we're all human beings, and there are only 24 hours in every day, and we're all very, very stretched. And I just want to point to one thing that we've tried to do in the UK. Obviously, I'm going to talk about that, aren't I? But one of the things we've tried to do in the UK, and I see replicated in a number of other places, is how we can use teaching online to bring students together who would not otherwise be able to do it, and how we can use universities to provide experiences not just to attract them in, but to teach them so that then they become aware of what the classics might be. I'm an avid collector of snippets and bits of information about classics in the world around us. And it may be the way that the algorithms on social media work. They kind of send me things that I'm interested in. But if you think about it, you could just spend the next week in your own minds just picking up where there is something classical in the news, on the radio, if anyone ever listens to the radio anymore, on the computer, wherever it might be, which can be broadly described as classics. Latin-related, Greek-related, ancient history, ancient world-related. And I think you'll be really surprised about how many there are. Hundreds and hundreds, I've noticed. Did you know, I'm going to mention this, Taylor Swift sang a song about Aristotle this week. Did you know, for example, that a railway engine called Hercules was repainted this week? This is the sort of stuff that gets sent me. Did you know, for example, that there was a mythological re-representation of the statue of Eros on Shaftesbury Avenue in the centre of London? Now, I, as a classicist, my ears go, my eyes go, and I see those things, and I think, classics. How many of our students and parents let those things pass them by because they're not attuned to them? But if they knew about them, they might derive some interest, and who knows, they might persuade their kids it might be worthwhile having a look at that. So I think there's an awful lot of classics in the world that a lot of people are simply not aware of. And maybe one of the things that our job is to do is to talk to those people and to make the case for classics all around us, not just in the classroom.
Okay. Just about these snippets, I have to tell you this too, Stephen. So just a few months ago in Flanders, a book appeared written in Dutch, and the title is Zeus in Jeans. You will all understand, I guess, the Dutch, so it's just Zeus in Jeans, and it's basically about this. It's about these snippets of ancient culture being everywhere, from pop music to popular advertising, everywhere. Okay, John, Stephen, thank you so much for these illuminating thoughts, for presenting this book, to which we are greatly looking forward. Okay, dear friends and colleagues, our next speaker is going to be Dr. Christophe Rico from the Polis Institute. Polis is a language institute, so the Polis Institute mainly in Jerusalem. And Christophe Rico is going to present in French. But by my own experience, I can tell you that Christophe Rico is such a great presenter that you will always understand him, whether in French, whether in English, whether in ancient Greek, whether in Latin. If you don't believe me, just look him up on YouTube and you will find a wonderful and a very clear presentation by him, by the way, given in ancient Greek. So the title of his talk will be Living Sequential Expression, which sort of summarizes the teaching methods at the Polis Institute. En français, le titre est L'expression vivante séquentielle. Et je suis ravi de donner la parole maintenant à Christophe Rico.
Thank you so much. I will speak in French, but I will say some words in English. First of all, to thank both Euroclassica and the Academia Vivarium Novum for the kind invitation they have made to me to come to this wonderful conference. I will speak in French slowly so that everybody can follow, and then the questions might be in any language. Donc, je commence en français. Expression vivante séquentielle, qui est une nouvelle technique d'acquisition des langues étrangères, pas simplement le grec ou le latin, toute langue, qui a été développée à l'Institut Polis sous l'inspiration de François Gouin. Alors, François Gouin, quelques mots sur François Gouin d'abord. François Gouin a vécu à la fin du XIXe siècle en France. C'était un professeur de latin et de grec. Et donc, François Gouin a... On va mettre peut-être sa... Voilà sa photo. François Gouin, il a décidé à un moment donné de commencer un doctorat. Et à l'époque, c'était l'Allemagne qui rayonnait en Europe et dans le monde entier pour les lettres classiques. Et donc, il a reçu le conseil d'aller, on lui a conseillé d'aller en Allemagne apprendre l'allemand. Il faut savoir qu'à la fin du XIXe siècle, il n'y avait pas de moyens très faciles, très aisés, pour apprendre une langue étrangère. Il n'y avait pas de méthode, ou pratiquement. Il y avait quand même Comenius, mais ce n'était pas très développé non plus. Et donc, ce qu'il a décidé de faire, c'est d'aller à l'université avec des Allemands. La première chose qu'il a faite, c'est d'acheter un livre où il y avait un trésor des racines germaniques. Il a appris ça par cœur, puis il est allé à l'université et il n'a pas compris un traître mot de ce qui se disait en cours. Donc il est revenu dans sa chambre et là, il a décidé de commencer à apprendre à traduire Goethe et Schiller de l'allemand en français. Il a traduit pendant 2 mois, puis il est revenu en cours et il ne comprenait toujours rien. Donc il s'est dit, il faudra faire quelque chose, et donc il a décidé d'abord d'apprendre toute la grammaire de l'allemand. Donc il a appris la grammaire de l'allemand par cœur. Et ayant appris et possédant la grammaire de l'allemand, il est allé de nouveau en cours, et puis toujours la même expérience, il ne comprenait rien. Donc il s'est dit, mais c'est évident, je ne connais pas le lexique, je ne connais pas le vocabulaire. Il faut absolument que j'apprenne un dictionnaire allemand-français par cœur. Il a trouvé un dictionnaire qui comptait quelques 20 000 mots, et puis il s'est dit, ben voilà, tous les jours, de 6 heures du matin à 1 heure de l'après-midi, j'apprends le dictionnaire. Je commence par la lettre A et je finis par la lettre Z. Il a fait ça, c'était au terme d'un patient labeur pendant 3 mois. Il est retourné en cours et toujours la même expérience. Il ne comprenait rien, mais il connaissait très bien le vocabulaire allemand, mais il ne comprenait rien. Alors il était désespéré. Il se souvenait que quand il avait quitté la France, il avait un neveu, le fils de sa sœur, qui était en bas âge. Il avait 2 ans, il ne parlait pas encore la langue française. Il voulait revoir sa sœur, il voulait revoir son neveu. Et donc, il a décidé de revenir en France. Mais avant de revenir, il a rencontré quelques travailleurs français qui étaient arrivés en Allemagne à la même époque que lui. Et il a été abasourdi quand il a vu que ces travailleurs étaient capables de baragouiner l'allemand. Autrement dit, eux, qui étaient de simples travailleurs qui n'avaient pas d'études, avaient réussi à faire ce que lui n'avait pas réussi à faire, tout lettré qu'il était. Il n'avait pas réussi à apprendre la langue allemande, mais ces travailleurs français exilés en Allemagne avaient bien réussi à le faire. Donc, François Gouin a décidé de rentrer en France en se disant que peut-être qu'il y avait un problème dans sa méthode. Et il est rentré en France et il s'est rendu compte que son neveu, qui n'avait que 2 ans quand il avait quitté la France, maintenant il était âgé de 3 ans. En 1 an, il avait réussi à faire ce que lui n'avait pas réussi à faire. Il avait appris une langue, la langue française. Et son neveu s'exprimait parfaitement bien en français. Donc il s'est dit, peut-être qu'il faut que j'observe la façon dont les enfants apprennent leur langue. Et c'est là, en regardant un petit peu ce que faisait son neveu, qu'il s'est rendu compte qu'il a eu l'idée de la séquentialité. Bien. Alors, quels sont les principes? Alors, il a développé toute une méthode, et pour la petite histoire, je dirais qu'ensuite, il a appris l'allemand parfaitement, et il a même été capable de prononcer des conférences en allemand en Allemagne. Donc, quels sont les principes de la méthode de François Gouin? D'abord, l'importance de l'oreille par rapport à la vue. Ensuite, on va les voir dans le détail, ces principes. 3 étapes: perception, réflexion, conception. Ensuite, très important, l'importance du verbe et de l'instrument au sein de la phrase, beaucoup plus important que le nom ou le substantif. Puis, la séquence, qui est la première opération logique. Je vais longuement m'attarder sur l'importance de la séquence. Et ensuite, il a décidé de décrire point par point l'expérience humaine en ce qu'il appelle les séries et les thèmes. C'est-à-dire qu'il s'agit de partir des actions essentielles de notre vie pour les diviser en un certain nombre d'étapes. Donc, ça, c'est in nuce les principes de la méthode de François Gouin. Je vais les voir dans le détail. Donc, tout cela, il l'a expliqué dans un livre qui s'appelle « L'art d'enseigner et d'étudier les langues », qui a été très vite traduit en anglais. Vous avez le livre et il est accessible aussi bien en français qu'en anglais. Donc, la primauté de l'oreille sur l'œil. L'oreille, nous dit François Gouin, est l'organe naturel et le premier organe, l'organe le plus immédiat du langage. Lui substituer l'œil ou la main, comme cela se pratique dans toutes les écoles, c'est commettre une faute capitale qui, à elle seule, condamne le plus grand philologue du monde à ne pouvoir faire en 20 ans ce que fait en 6 mois la plus humble nourrice. Autrement dit, François Gouin se rend compte que ce qui est essentiel pour apprendre une langue étrangère, c'est de commencer par l'oreille. Lingua ex auditu. Ensuite, il y a 3 étapes dans l'apprentissage de la langue. D'abord, donc il a vu comment son neveu, qui n'avait que 3 ans, a visité un moulin. Et au cours de la visite du moulin, il a d'abord eu une attitude très réceptive. On leur expliquait comment on produisait la farine, étape par étape. Et donc, le neveu de François Gouin a d'abord était très réceptif, en silence, pour essayer de voir ce qui se disait. Ensuite, il a gardé le silence pendant 1 heure, et ça c'est très important. C'est l'étape pendant laquelle il réfléchit, c'est l'étape de la réflexion. L'enfant avait besoin de réfléchir, d'assimiler ce qu'il avait appris. Puis enfin, il a raconté à tout le monde ce qu'il avait vu. Voici, je cite François Gouin, « En face du moulin, l'esprit de l'enfant avait pris une attitude passive et toute réceptive. Mais après l'heure de la digestion intellectuelle, il avait changé de rôle et, réagissant sur les impressions reçues et subies, il avait travaillé sur elles comme sur une matière première et les avait transformées en réalité, ou si l'on veut, en images subjectives, c'est-à-dire en idées. » Autre principe de François Gouin, l'importance du verbe et de l'instrument dans la phrase. Le verbe est beaucoup plus important que le nom. Nous sommes habitués à l'insistance sur le lexique dans toutes les méthodes d'enseignement. Pour Gouin, le plus important, c'est le verbe. Le nom va se déduire en fonction de la phrase, mais le plus important, c'est le verbe qui porte toute l'idée de la phrase. Donc, le verbe, nous dit François Gouin, mais c'était l'âme de la proposition. Le verbe, mais c'était le fondement sur lequel l'enfant bâtissait peu à peu sa proposition, sa phrase. Le verbe, mais c'était le germe d'où sortait pièce à pièce et s'épanouissait cette proposition elle-même. Le verbe, mais c'était le chaînon par lequel l'enfant attachait la proposition à la proposition, la perception à la perception, la conception à la conception. Nous pensons par une suite d'idées que nous enchaînons. Chaque phrase porte une idée. Il est beaucoup plus important d'apprendre des phrases quand on apprend une langue que d'apprendre des mots isolés. Il n'y a rien de pire que ce qu'on appelle en anglais les flashcards, c'est-à-dire ces fiches dans lesquelles d'un côté on met un nom dans une langue qu'on veut apprendre et on retourne la fiche et on a la traduction dans la langue que nous connaissons, dans la langue maternelle. Ça ne sert à presque rien. Ce qu'il faut, c'est apprendre des phrases. Si on a la phrase dans laquelle se trouve le mot que nous voulons apprendre, alors tout de suite on a un mini-contexte, on connaît la construction et tout s'éclaire et ça reste. J'ai fait moi-même l'expérience. Quand je suis arrivé en Israël, j'ai fait un ulpan, j'ai passé 2 mois et demi à apprendre l'hébreu. Et alors à la fin, j'avais un carnet dans lequel il y avait 1500 mots en hébreu avec la traduction en français. Et puis, je les avais appris plus ou moins pendant l'ulpan. Et ensuite, j'ai dû rester au chevet d'un malade pendant 1 semaine. Et là, j'ai occupé mes heures en lisant et en apprenant ce carnet. Au bout d'1 semaine, je connaissais mes 1500 mots. Au bout de 3 mois, je les avais presque tous oubliés. Vous voyez, ça ne sert pas à grand-chose. Si j'avais appris des phrases, elles seraient restées. La séquence, c'est la première opération logique. Ça, c'est l'intuition fondamentale de François Gouin et peut-être la plus profonde de ses intuitions. Il se rend compte que pour un enfant, la première opération logique, ce n'est pas l'opération dans laquelle on passe de la cause à l'effet, ou de l'effet à la cause, ou l'association, c'est plutôt la séquence. Un enfant comprend qu'il y a des activités où on fait d'abord une chose, ensuite une autre, ensuite une autre, et ensuite une autre. Et ça, c'est la première opération logique. Et c'est un appui très fort pour enseigner les langues à un enfant comme à un adulte. Gouin définit la vie de l'enfant comme une série de buts généraux qu'il se propose tout haut ou tout bas et qu'il atteint l'un après l'autre par des moyens successifs et parfaitement déterminés. Là, il y a de la suite, là, il y a de l'ordre. La séquence est certainement la première opération logique que l'enfant peut atteindre. Lorsqu'on découvre le monde, on exprime son expérience à travers la séquence en l'ordonnant. Par exemple, je décide mettons par exemple l'action ou l'activité qui consiste à prendre le bus. Bon, il y a une série d'actions. Je vais jusqu'à l'arrêt de bus. J'attends le bus. Le bus arrive. Je monte dans le bus, je paye mon ticket, je m'assois, j'arrive à ma destination, je descends du bus. Là, vous avez 8 actions qui sont parfaitement séquentielles. Si on apprend une langue en apprenant cette suite d'actions, tout s'imprime dans la mémoire de façon beaucoup plus profonde que si l'on apprenait un jour, je vais à l'arrêt de bus, puis 3 jours plus tard, je paye mon ticket, puis mon billet, puis 4 jours plus tard, je descends, puis 5 jours plus tard, je monte. Bon, il faut suivre un ordre. Donc, en raison de cette séquentialisation, Gouin a essayé de décrire toute l'expérience humaine à travers ce qu'il nomme des thèmes et des séries. Il s'agit de faire une sélection des activités essentielles de la vie et de les organiser en différentes étapes. Alors, par exemple, ouvrir une porte. Alors, évidemment, c'est un peu naïf, l'exemple. Ça, c'est l'exemple de François Gouin. Alors, moi, je trouve qu'il va trop loin. Il y a des actions qui sont moins importantes que d'autres et il faudrait simplifier énormément cette suite de presque 15 actions qu'il nous donne. Mais je vous donne exactement l'exemple de référence de François Gouin. Je vais vers la porte, je m'approche de la porte, je m'approche et m'approche encore, j'arrive à la porte, je m'arrête à la porte, j'allonge le bras, je prends la poignée, je tourne la poignée. J'ouvre la porte, j'ouvre la porte, je tire la porte cède, la porte tourne sur ses gonds, je lâche la poignée. Bon, donc dans l'édition de 1980, c'est ce qu'on avait, même chose en 1994, deuxième édition, la troisième édition également. Pour la première édition en anglais, on donne jusqu'à 15 étapes pour cette série. Donc, ce que fait François Gouin, et ça c'est son génie, il considère qu'il faut classer l'ensemble de l'expérience humaine à travers les séries. On peut dire que tous les jours, toutes les semaines, tous les mois, une fois par an, il y a une série d'activités que nous faisons qui se décomposent en une série d'actions. Et si j'arrive à classer toutes les activités que nous avons en cette série d'actions, je peux parler d'à peu près tout, d'à peu près tout ce que je fais. Et donc, on a déjà une langue qui est là. Pour Gouin, parler une langue revient à être capable d'exprimer oralement toute activité et tout phénomène. Donc, les séries pour les activités, les phénomènes pour les thèmes. Si l'on parvenait à relever toutes ces activités et phénomènes à travers les séries et les thèmes, et rendre les étudiants capables de les exprimer dans une langue déterminée, les étudiants auraient acquis cette langue. Je cite François Gouin, « Supposons maintenant qu'un élève ait conquis les séries des éléments, des plantes, de l'insecte, du poisson, du reptile, de l'amphibie, de l'oiseau, du quadrupède, de l'homme. » Parce que, évidemment, si on veut parler, par exemple, de l'épanouissement d'une fleur, bon, ça fait partie des séries, hein, toutes les étapes jusqu'à l'épanouissement d'une fleur. Saura-t-il toute la langue traduisant les faits extérieurs, l'expression de ce que Gouin appelle le non-moi? En un mot, tout le langage objectif? Oui. En effet, que reste-t-il à exprimer en dehors de ces faits? Le langage ne saurait représenter que ce que nous savons du monde où nous sommes. Or, nos séries ont la prétention d'épuiser les phénomènes généraux du monde objectif. Alors, je voudrais parler, là maintenant je m'éloigne un peu de François Gouin et on part vers le principe de l'expression vivante séquentielle. Donc la réflexion part du fait qu'il y a 4 principaux modes d'énonciation dans une langue. Le premier mode d'énonciation, c'est le dialogue. Un enfant, d'abord, il dialogue. Et quand on dialogue, les personnes les plus importantes, c'est le « je » et le « tu ». C'est ce qu'on voit, par exemple, dans les genres littéraires, dans le théâtre, le dialogue philosophique. Ensuite, le deuxième mode d'énonciation qu'apprend l'enfant, c'est le récit. Il raconte ce qu'il a fait. Et là apparaît le « il » ou le « elle » et le « je » pour le récit autobiographique. Donc, pour les genres littéraires, on a le roman, la biographie, le conte. Ensuite, nous avons le discours. C'est ce que je fais en ce moment. En ce moment, c'est un discours. Donc là, on a le « je » et le « vous ». Si le discours, si on interpelle l'auditoire. Bon, le discours d'apparat, juridique ou politique, l'apologie, le texte didactique. Puis, finalement, et tout le monde, même dans sa propre langue, dans sa langue maternelle, tout le monde n'arrive pas à ce degré, on arrive au lyrisme, c'est-à-dire l'expression, la poésie lyrique, les chansons, et là, la personne la plus importante, c'est évidemment la première personne. Quelles sont les compétences que l'on acquiert quand on acquiert une langue étrangère? Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire acquérir une langue étrangère? Bon, la liste que je donne n'est ni chronologique ni hiérarchique. Il y a d'abord des compétences grammaticales en toute situation d'énonciation, que ce soit dans la conversation, dans le récit, dans le discours ou le lyrisme. Il y a ensuite les compétences lexicales, également en toute situation d'énonciation. Il y a ensuite les compétences relatives au dialogue. Quand est-ce que nous dialoguons? Dans une conversation en présentiel, dans une conversation téléphonique, par Skype, par WhatsApp, par SMS. Il y a les compétences relatives au récit. On raconte une expérience, on raconte un rêve, on raconte une histoire drôle, on raconte une recette, on donne le compte-rendu d'un accident. Et enfin, les compétences relatives au discours, lettres ou courriels, conférences ou exposés, même récitation d'une prière, description, tweet, article blog, etc. Quelles sont les compétences relatives au dialogue? Les éléments. Alors, si on veut enseigner le dialogue, essayons d'identifier les éléments les plus fréquents d'abord, dans tout dialogue. Salutation, affirmation ou négation, temps et lieu, question, compréhension et incompréhension, etc. Essayons d'identifier les modalités logiques ou émotives, opinion, choix et préférence, obligation et nécessité, etc. Et puis, finalement, essayons d'identifier les principaux sujets de conversation, le temps qu'il fait, l'achat et la vente, l'amitié, la politique, le sport, etc. Et travaillons chacun de ces domaines pour développer la compétence relative au dialogue. Je pense que la plupart des méthodes développent très bien les compétences relatives au dialogue, surtout aujourd'hui. Ça, c'est la partie la plus développée. Il y a également les compétences relatives au discours, et ça, c'est déjà plus rare. Pour l'Antiquité, nous avons les progymnasmata, qui sont une source extraordinaire pour apprendre à faire un discours, à prononcer un discours en grec ou en latin. Ce sont les exercices rhétoriques que pratiquaient les étudiants qui voulaient devenir orateurs. Donc, chaque cité décidait de payer quelqu'un pour aller, par exemple, fréquenter le professeur Libanios à Antioche et se former auprès de Libanios pendant 3 ou 4 ans. Quand cette personne revenait, ayant été payé aux frais de la cité, il se devait de prononcer un discours pour montrer qu'il avait bien appris. Et la rhétorique, et Dieu sait si c'est un point qui est développé au vivarium, la rhétorique a toujours été l'essentiel de l'éducation gréco-latine. L'éducation gréco-latine, et même pendant le Moyen-Âge, a reposé sur la capacité à prononcer des discours. Il y a aujourd'hui un intérêt renouvelé pour la littérature relative à ces techniques, comme le montrent quelques titres que je cite dans le PowerPoint. Les compétences relatives au récit, je pense que c'est le point qui est le moins développé aujourd'hui dans l'enseignement des langues. Or, c'est un point essentiel pour développer la capacité à s'exprimer. Et c'est précisément ce dont François Gouin a eu l'intuition. On a beaucoup moins prêté attention aux compétences relatives au récit. Et c'est pourquoi nous avons essayé de développer à l'Institut Polis, inspiré par François Gouin, la technique de Living Sequential Expression, l'expression vivante séquentielle. Il s'agit de souligner l'importance de la séquence dans le processus d'apprentissage, l'importance de l'expression de l'expérience humaine essentielle dans la langue que celui qui apprend est en train d'acquérir. Alors, je pense que c'est un vide du Second Language Acquisition, de la didactique des langues. Si l'on analyse les chemins de la mémoire, et si on les prend en compte dans l'enseignement des langues, je pense que cela permet d'accélérer le processus d'acquisition. Donc, je me suis aperçu que les apprenants avaient de fréquentes lacunes lexicales dans certains domaines sémantiques. J'ai même constaté cela, j'ai travaillé quelques années au lycée français de Jérusalem. Et c'est un lycée où il y a surtout, c'est un lycée un peu différent des autres lycées français à l'étranger. Normalement, dans un lycée français à l'étranger, il y a 60% d'étrangers tiers et 40% de francophones de naissance. Au lycée français de Jérusalem, il y a 90% d'étrangers tiers et 10% seulement de francophones de naissance. Alors, j'avais une fois eu une discussion avec un instituteur et je lui avais dit, essaye de voir, tu leur demandes à tes élèves qui avaient 10 ans, tu leur demandes un petit peu qu'ils décrivent comment ils font le ménage chez eux. Et alors, il leur a demandé de faire cela, et puis s'est aperçu, alors qu'ils parlaient très bien français, mais qu'ils n'avaient pas le vocabulaire pour parler d'un aspirateur, pour parler d'un balai, pour parler d'une serpillière, ils ne savaient plus parler du ménage. Donc il y a des trous lexicaux. Et il s'agit d'identifier les actions et les activités fréquentes en adaptant l'acquisition linguistique aux différents aspects de la vie moderne. Et ça vaut aussi pour les langues anciennes. Si on n'est pas capable de parler du ménage en latin ou en grec, on va avoir des trous, même dans certains textes littéraires, parce que les textes littéraires présupposent cela. Donc ensuite, il s'agit de suivre les étapes du développement dynamique de la langue, Language Dynamic Development, ce qui est un principe qui consiste à se dire, on s'inspire. Toute langue est un algorithme. Quand on apprend une langue, il y a un algorithme, il y a des choses qu'il faut apprendre d'abord, il y a des choses qu'il faut apprendre après. On commence d'abord par les salutations. On passe ensuite au déictique et à ce qu'on appelle les embrayeurs. Je, tu, ici, maintenant. Ces mots-là sont essentiels quand on apprend une langue. Il y a des choses qu'il faut apprendre d'abord pour aller plus vite ensuite. Bon. Eh bien, cet algorithme s'inspire du parcours qu'un enfant réalise au cours de l'apprentissage de sa langue maternelle. La living sequential expression, l'expression vivante séquentielle, respecte ce processus de développement dynamique, je suis désolé pour la faute de frappe, à partir du Total Physical Response, la réaction physique immédiate, TPR, jusqu'à l'acquisition d'une morphologie verbale plus complexe. Vous avez tous entendu parler du Total Physical Response? C'est une technique qui consiste simplement à enseigner une langue en donnant des consignes. Lève-toi, marche, reviens, assieds-toi, écris. Bien. Alors, pourquoi l'appeler Living Sequential Expression? Ce nom a été forgé en collaboration avec Stephen Hill, spécialiste de l'acquisition des langues étrangères. La première idée fut d'appeler cette technique Sequential TPR, mais la réaction physique immédiate, TPR, n'est qu'un mode d'application parmi d'autres de la Living Sequential Expression. On voulait combiner les concepts de séquentialité et d'expérience, c'est-à-dire d'expression vivante. Expressing life experience through sequentiality rendait bien l'idée, mais représentait un titre trop long, d'où finalement Living Sequential Expression. La discussion a eu lieu à travers un échange de mails le 6 décembre 2017. Donc vous voyez que c'est une technique récente. Qu'est-ce que ce titre implique? D'abord, le caractère immersif de la technique, living. Ensuite, la connexion entre les actions, qui sont un moyen d'acquisition de la langue, sequential, la séquentialité. Et ensuite, le caractère oral de cette technique, expression. Ce n'est pas un simple moyen d'apprentissage passif, mais c'est une technique de production langagière. Alors, il s'agit de suivre les chemins de la mémoire. Comment nous apprenons? D'abord par la perception. On se souvient de ce qui a été vu et entendu. Pour une langue, c'est d'abord entendre, ensuite voir. Donc, c'est pour ça que l'utilisation des consignes, le TPR, lève-toi, va vers l'arrêt de bus, attends le bus arrive, monte dans le bus, paye ton billet, assieds-toi, descends du bus. Donc, ces consignes renforcent la mémorisation avec l'utilisation d'images. Ensuite, l'expérience. Si on demande à quelqu'un de se lever, d'aller vers un arrêt de bus imaginaire, d'attendre un bus imaginaire, et puis il y a un autre étudiant qui fait le chauffeur de bus et qui arrive, puis ensuite de monter dans le bus, de façon dans son imagination, puis de s'asseoir, etc., on l'a fait. Même si c'est de façon un petit peu virtuelle, mais on l'a fait. Et donc, parce qu'on l'a fait, on s'en souvient. Ça, c'est l'expérience. Donc, c'est renforcé par les activités de TPR. Ensuite, il y a le contexte. Dans toute activité de Living Sequential Expression, ce qui est important, c'est le message adapté, ce qu'on appelle le comprehensible input. On ne peut pas introduire 10 mots à la fois, 10 mots nouveaux à la fois. Il s'agit de s'appuyer sur le vocabulaire déjà connu. C'est le fameux principe de Krashen, x plus 1, x plus 1. Ensuite, il y a finalement la séquentialité. Dans une série d'actions connectées sur le plan logique et chronologique, l'ordre des actions renforce la mémorisation. C'est incroyable à quel point les étudiants se souviennent de ce qu'ils ont fait. Je fais chaque année, aux États-Unis, on a un synodos, donc des activités en grec pour des professeurs de grec, et on a toutes sortes d'activités. Et chaque jour, on a 1 heure d'expression vivante séquentielle. Et quand je demande un petit peu à chacun ce qu'ils ont apprécié du synodos, c'est unanime, tous me disent que ce qu'ils ont préféré, ce qui les a le plus aidés, c'est l'expression vivante séquentielle. Alors il s'agit d'identifier les tâches et les événements principaux pour couvrir autant que possible toute la palette des activités fréquentes. Si je suis capable de parler de toutes les activités fréquentes dans une langue déterminée, eh bien, j'ai un certain degré de fluidité dans cette langue. Donc, il s'agit d'établir une liste des tâches quotidiennes, hebdomadaires, mensuelles, annuelles, et également des événements qui se produisent rarement dans l'existence et qui constituent l'ensemble de l'expérience humaine. Et ensuite, on subdivise chaque tâche en une série de séquences de 4 à 7 actions, séquentiellement reliées entre elles. Prendre le bus, va vers l'arrêt de bus, attends l'arrivée du bus, monte dans le bus, va vers le conducteur, prends ton ticket, assieds-toi, descends du bus. Voilà 7 verbes. Il faut d'abord donner les consignes, l'étudiant le fait, donc il va vers le bus, il fait semblant d'aller vers le bus, il s'arrête à un arrêt imaginaire, un arrêt de bus, puis il monte dans le bus, etc. Tout le monde le voit, donc il y a l'ouïe et il y a la vue, chacun le fait, donc il y a l'expérience, et puis il y a la séquentialité. Nous pouvons établir une liste d'environ 150 activités, quotidiennes, hebdomadaires, mensuelles, etc., telles que se lever, se laver, aller à l'école, prendre un bus, conduire, faire la cuisine, manger, faire des achats. Chaque activité peut être subdivisée en une série de 2 à 5 séquences. Chaque séquence contient de 4 à 7 actions. Cela représente environ 2500 consignes et 3500 mots qui représentent le vocabulaire essentiel de toute langue, mais appris en séquentialité. C'est extrêmement efficace. Je suis devenu un apôtre de la Living Sequential Expression. C'est quelque chose qui est extrêmement efficace et je recommande à tout le monde de l'employer. Mouvement habituel, se lever, marcher, s'arrêter, s'asseoir, monter, descendre, tourner, courir, sauter, on le fait tous les jours. Mouvements liés aux parties du corps, se gratter la tête, se toucher les yeux ou la bouche, lever, baisser les bras, les jambes. Tâches quotidiennes, se laver, s'habiller, aller à l'école ou au travail, prendre un moyen de transport en commun, bus, métro, tram. aller en voiture quelque part, conduire, suivre un cours, enseigner, prendre le petit déjeuner, déjeuner ou dîner, mettre la table, faire la cuisine, manger, faire la vaisselle, lire ou jouer, se promener dans le quartier, aller au jardin public, parler au téléphone, clavarder, envoyer un SMS, parler aux membres de la famille, regarder la télévision, naviguer sur la toile, aller au lit, dormir. Les thèmes englobent certaines activités qui ne seront jamais réalisées par l'apprenant, mais font parfois l'objet de nos conversations. Labourer, semer, récolter, cueillir des fruits, coudre, filer, tricoter, etc. En se fondant sur ces prémices, nous travaillons actuellement à Polis à la préparation d'une série d'ouvrages illustrés. Il y en a quelques-uns qui ont paru. Ça, c'est Unus Duo Tres. L'édition grecque, Hendiotria, est déjà parue, ainsi que les premières leçons de l'édition copte. Vous les trouverez sur Internet, sur Amazon. Si quelqu'un veut feuilleter à la fin, il peut le faire. Je n'ai apporté que l'édition latine. Donc, ultérieurement, une série de textes fondés sur le vocabulaire de chaque séquence de 4 ou 5 actions permettra de renforcer le processus d'acquisition. Et ces textes illustreront le vocabulaire contenu dans les différentes séquences, dans de courts récits et des dialogues simples, afin d'offrir un message adapté aux étudiants. Comment mener une session pour un professeur? Bon, la session commence par des activités TPR, c'est-à-dire on donne des consignes aux étudiants qui sont séquentielles pour qu'ils réalisent une activité. Cette série de consignes peut être donnée plusieurs fois à plusieurs étudiants. Ils ne se lassent pas. Il faut le faire 1 fois, 2 fois, 3 fois, 4 fois, 5 fois, autant qu'il le faut, afin d'habituer les apprenants au vocabulaire qu'ils découvrent. En même temps, dans la mesure où les consignes sont renouvelées plusieurs fois devant l'ensemble des apprenants, chaque étudiant verra de ses propres yeux comment la séquence est réalisée. Et cela facilite la mémorisation, parce qu'on entend, on fait, on voit. À partir de cette étape, on peut projeter les illustrations, ou encore on peut ouvrir le livre qui contient les illustrations, et l'enseignant peut demander aux étudiants de travailler par groupe de 2. Donc, un étudiant demande à l'autre, lève-toi, va vers l'arrêt du bus, attends le bus. Donc, et chacun le fait. Donc, comme ça, en travaillant par groupe de 2, toute la classe est en train de travailler en même temps. Et on se donne des consignes l'un à l'autre. Ensuite, l'enseignant peut répéter les consignes à un étudiant et, à la suite de chaque action, lui demander de dire ce qu'il est en train de faire ou ce qu'il a fait. Bon, par exemple, je dirais à quelqu'un, anastésie, tie poiesas, tie praxas. Et il va devoir répondre anesten, kallista, kainun badisde, tie praxas, et badisa, kallista, kainun stéthi, tie poiesas, esten. Et ensuite, il pourra dire tous les verbes l'un après l'autre. Ego proton anesten, eita de ebadisa, kai eita esten, kai eita palinekathisa. Voilà une séquence. Donc, on peut l'employer pour le présent, pour le passé, pour le futur, en demandant à l'étudiant ce qu'il va faire ou ce qu'elle va faire. Il s'agit finalement, le processus d'acquisition peut s'appuyer sur le message adapté. L'étudiant peut alors lire les courts récits et dialogues fondés sur le vocabulaire de chaque séquence de 4 ou 5 actions. Donc, anistatai ho Stéphanos, anastésie, peripatei, peripatei ho Stéphanos, stéthi, histatai ho Stéphanos, kathison, kathisdei ho Stéphanos. On peut l'employer à l'aoriste, au futur. Voilà, je suis prêt à répondre à vos questions maintenant. Si vous avez des questions, je ne sais pas si on a beaucoup de temps. on n'a pas beaucoup de temps. J'ai dépassé le temps.
No, yeah. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I propose we do as follows. We will proceed with our other speaker, our next speaker, who is Raf van Rooy, and then afterwards there will be some time left before lunch for questions. That is both to Christophe and to Raf. But thanks again. This was such a wonderful presentation. It was very much appreciated how you related also to progymnasmata. Thank you. Okay, quite soon, that is next year, I guess, the Catholic University of Leuven, which also happens to be my alma mater, will celebrate its 600th anniversary. Will be a big celebration. And this university has a long and very distinguished tradition of teaching of classical languages, that is Greek, Latin, and also Hebrew. Long tradition of distinguished professors too, and it is my pleasure to introduce one of the new professors at the Department of Latin Language and Literature, who is Raf van Rooy. Now, Raf has very many, if I may say so, research interests. I remember that a few months ago, his book came out on, it's actually an anthology of what they call New Ancient Greek Poetry, which is a wonderful field. It appears that, let's say, up to nowadays, there have been people creating and composing poetry in the ancient Greek language. Raf has also written a wonderful book, which I would recommend to all of you, on the very old and intricate question of the difference between language and dialect. What is a language? What is a dialect? And the discussion seems to go back at least to the Renaissance already. And his very early, Raf's very early contributions were already on an institute at the University of Leuven, which was world famous then for its teaching of classical languages. That is the Collegium Trilingue. And we have actually wonderful experience, wonderful testimonies of the practicalities, everyday practicalities of teaching, how it was done at the Collegium Trilingue. We have notes of students and so on and so on. And this will basically be the talk of Professor Raf van Rooy, the Collegium Trilingue teaching methods. I'm happy to give you the floor. Raf?
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, Christian. Too kind as always. If all is well, there should be a handout that may be distributed, I hope. This will be crucial for the experience I will be trying to give you in the next 40 minutes or so. I also need you to use your historical imagination a bit. You have to be not here in this wonderful villa in Frascati, but in a much colder place, namely Leuven, the fish markets, so you need to imagine some kind of fish smell as well. You need to be imagining that you're sitting on one of those benches over there with the teacher up high or at the front of the classroom in any case, with no blackboards or anything to help you. And it's also much colder because we're in the fall, not in the summer, and it's in the more northern part of Europe, and it's in the third hour post meridium, as you can see on the slide. So I hope the handout is being distributed, but in the meantime, I will put on my cap of professor at the Collegium Trilingue, Rutgerus Rescius, in whose classroom you have ended up this wonderful noon. Numquam suspicatus sum fore, auditores unde quaque doctissimi, ut tam frequenti auditorio te Homero prelegerem, eiusque Odysseam vobiscum interpretarem. Poeta illa versus heroicos de bello Troiano composuit ut scitis, quia hoc carmen sepius auscultatur, hic in foro piscium Lovaniensi. Tantos iam annos Iliada docebam hic in Collegio Trilingue Puslidiano vel potius Erasmiano dicam, ego Rutgerus Retius Driopolitanus. Nunc tenuo ad Odysseam progredior, ut cognoscatis alteram etiam partem quae Vergilius in Eneide sua tam feliciter imitatus est. Cur Homerus nobis legendus fortasse requiritis. Divus Basilius Magnus dicit totum opus Homeri nihil aliud esse quam laudem virtutis, unde etiam a Christianis legendum. In homilia sua ad Juvenes de utilitate capienda ex gentilium autorum libris ita scribit Grece. Passem men ipisis to omiro aretis estin epenos. Perlegamus nunc librum primum sive rhapsodiam primam Odyssee Homerice. Spero unique vestrum exemplar textus Homerici esse? Habetis handout? Exemplaria apud bibliopolam Hieronymus clut vene und hic ad portam maiorem aut ex officina mea propria nam uxorem filiosque nutrire debeo. Sed hec hactenus incipiamus alpha theon agori Odyssidi Palladi Tarsos. Hic versus argumentum primi libri enigmate indicat, quod pagina priore pluribus sententiis prosaicis exhibitum est. Alpha hoc est primo libro, Theonagori Andreas Divus interpres deorum concilium interpretatur, sub auditur concilium fit aut convenit. Odyssidi Palladi significat Ulissi faventi Palladi, quia Pallas Minerva in concilio deorum commonstrat audaciam. Scilicet intercedendi apud Jovem patrem pro Ulisse. Nunc sequitur exordium, cuius versus primi ita sonant Grece. Andra miene per musa, politropon os malapolla, plancti epitriis, ieron tolietron e perse, pollon d'anthropon, idenastia cenon egno. Latine ita vertit divus ad verbum. Virum mihi dic musa multitium, qui valle multum eravit, ex quo Troie sacram urbem te populatus est. Multorum autem virorum vidit urbes et mentem cognovit. Sed non omnia bene interpretata sunt opinor. Nomen compositum politropon prudentem significat potius quam multitium, quod est verbum latinum inusitatissimum. Ulixes multi concilii est, versatilibus moribus, capitur hoc nomen etiam sepe pro doloso et homine versipeli. In Odyssea Homerus frequenter vocat ulixem polimitin, hoc est multiplici rerum cognitione. Plancti significat eravit, hec forma pro e plancti, apotu plasome, gamma interposito per pleonasmum, qui est additio alicuius litere. Gamma inseritur inter alpha et chi, etc., etc. I could go on for an hour, but that's to give you just a glimpse of the Collegium Trilingue and its teaching methods. So this was a kind of historical reenactment. I was just wearing the cap of Rutgerescus because people and professors at the Trilingue were very fond of wearing hats. We will see an image of one of the professors wearing a hat later on. And we were at the start of a new lecture series where the professor used the textbook that he had published himself in his own printing office some 8 years earlier. And he also was a bit of a character, this Rutger Rescius, but one with a deep knowledge of the Greek language and literature, including also its material aspects, because he was a printer of the classics, especially the Greek classics as well. But now, unfortunately, I'm back again, Raf van Rooy here at the Euroclassica conference in a hot villa, in a beautiful setting. Thanks to the organizers for having me, for hosting me. It's really a pleasure to be here at this magnificent place. And I must admit that I have a much more modest grasp of the two classical languages than Rescius ever had. But in any case, I hope to give you an idea of the teaching methods at the Leuven Collegium Trilingue, which offered language baths for Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, both in critical reading and comprehension, and to some extent also in active speaking and even writing. And I hope at least some of you could follow my little historical reenactment to some extent, and perhaps noticed already some things about the method and some of its vices as well. For instance, the pronunciation used, which caused problems in a day and age without a blackboard to write on. But yeah, if it was all gibberish, don't worry. I'll come back to the different steps of the teaching method later on in the presentation. But first I have to give you a very brief introduction to what the Collegium Trilingue Lovaniense actually is. Then I will survey the methods adopted, especially for Latin and Greek. That's the focus of this conference. If you really want to know about Hebrew, ask me during one of the coffee breaks, I would say. And I will also show you how we have been able to reconstruct them, although you're all holding the answer already in your hands, because those are the notes that one of the students took in 1543 during the lesson that I tried to reenact for you. And finally, I will add some reflections on what turned the Collegium Trilingue into a success story in the 16th century, and maybe we'll glean some lessons from it for today's practices. If not, then at least you'll have a historical perspective on teaching methods dating from the very same century, I think, as the villa that we are currently in. Although I think that the building at the fish market in Leuven was much less sumptuous than this one. So, the Collegium Trilingue was founded in 1517, so in 2017 we celebrated this in every possible way, also with a book of essays on the teaching at the Collegium Trilingue. And it existed until the French came along and destroyed everything in Leuven. But the main period of flourishing was the 16th century until 1578, when the Spanish destroyed everything in Leuven. It was founded with the heritage of a very, very prominent diplomat and humanist, Jerome of Busseleiden, but the idea was actually the one of Erasmus of Rotterdam, because he wanted to create a language institute where you could study these three sacred languages, the languages of the New Testament, the Old Testament, and also the translation, the major translation of the Old and the New Testament into Latin by his hero, Saint Jerome. And he wanted to facilitate students to achieve this ideal of the vir trilinguis, for which Saint Jerome was the patron saint. And the Collegium Trilingue was also an embodiment of his scientific method of going ad fontes, to the sources. He thought that you had to go back to the actual classical sources of classical authors, but also of the Bible. So the New Testament especially was crucial for him, and he even dared to make a new translation of the New Testament, defying his great hero, Saint Jerome. And there's also a moral subtext there, because he very much believed that if you read good literature in an elegant language, you would by default become a good person. So that is a moral underpinning of classics teaching at the Collegium Trilingue, and more broadly in the humanist period. What is also, I think, very important is that the classes were for free. I will come back to that later on as well. And if you read the literature on the Collegium Trilingue, it's really lyrical. Everyone says it's great, or what a innovative institute with a groundbreaking and revolutionary method and so on. But no one has actually ever bothered to look at the student notes, where you could find this alleged innovation, or yeah, I say alleged because there are of course always critical notes to make on this. And for instance, if you look at the work of the most thorough historiographer of the Collegium Trilingue, Henry de Vogt, he has written 4 volumes on the Collegium Trilingue, and student notes are mentioned only once in one footnote. So this one here, and it leads to the copy of a book of Homer's Odyssey, which was the inspiration for my historical reenactment just a couple of minutes ago. So, thanks to the exhibition, there was a new impetus. There was an exhibition organized for the celebration of the quincentenary of the Collegium Trilingue, and this was an incentive to look for student notes, because it resulted also in a research project Ad Fontes in the classroom, and then 2 more research projects which have finished or almost finished. Actually, the top project, Virgil and Homer at the Leuven Collegium Trilingue, the PhD student working on that, Xander Feist, is going to submit next week, so it's all done now. But I would just want to single out here that we started with one body of student notes, the one from which I did the reenactment, but now we have over 30 bodies of student notes, which we haven't been able to study all, unfortunately. So if you want to have some spare time left, feel free to help us out, because we're also editing all of these student notes in an online database to which I will come very soon. So this is the page that you're holding in your hands. So these are the student notes by a certain Johannes Aegidius, Jan Gillis probably in Dutch, taken during these classes. And in the meantime, we have even found parallel notes. So we have found notes taken by fellow students of Johannes Aegidius, which allows for interesting comparisons, of course. I will come back to that as well later on if I have the time. In any case, stop me if I need to stop, but we'll see what we can do. So, I will talk a bit about how we dealt with the student notes, because you can see these are very complex texts. These are manuscript additions to a printed Greek text. You can't really edit those in a linear way. So what we did is we were very naive and started out in Microsoft Word, which didn't work at all, as you can imagine. So then we asked around at the department, and maybe some of you know the Trismegistos project at KU Leuven, and they have a tremendous expertise with the FileMaker software. So we turned to that to edit all of the notes and also make translations of these notes, so anyone can try to access the contents of the student notes taken at the Collegium Trilingue. And this is all turned into an online website where you can consult these student notes. So we have taken the Greek text that was printed in the edition by the professor, and every word in bold has an annotation. And if you look at on the right-hand side, we provide all kinds of information about individual notes. So we transcribe the note, we translate the note as well, and we give some kind of typology. It's about grammar, it's about lexicon, it's about some plant that is mentioned in the source text, or something else still. So you can all go there by surfing to www.dalet.be, and then you will be able to access this treasure trove of student notes taken at the Collegium Trilingue. And as you can see from the image here, the Collegium Trilingue, or the website Dalet, database of the Leuven Trilingue, offers much more than the student notes alone. So we started from editing the student notes, but we have tried to reconstruct the entire curriculum of the Collegium Trilingue for the 16th century. We are editing as many notes as we can find, and for which, in as far as the resources that we have allow us. We also provide lists of books that we know were read at the Collegium Trilingue, that circulated there, and the people that were involved at the Collegium Trilingue. So if you want to give some further food to your historical imagination, you can browse around in our database, which, by the way, also has a teacher's corner, which is maybe interesting for Dutch and Flemish teachers. We edit there post-classical Latin and Greek texts that can be used in high schools. And we use the same methodology as we do for the editing of the student notes. So we offer the text, for instance, of the Praise of Folly of Erasmus, and every word in bold has some explanation on the right-hand side. So it's pretty convenient, I would say, for classroom usage. But we're still working on that. It's still work in progress. And that's just a sidetrack of what I want to talk about today. So that as an introduction to the Collegium Trilingue, the historical context, and especially the research that we have been doing on this since 2017. And I now want to say very briefly a few words on how the teaching actually occurred. So those of you who were able to follow along with the historical reenactment will have heard every individual bit already, but I will just break down certain elements here. So every lecture series would start with a Latin introductory oration by the professor, introducing especially the author, who is Homer, what did he write. Those were pretty simple questions back then. those are less straightforward today, I would say. But in any case, they would repeat some basic facts about Homer. If possible, they would also try to relate the work of the author they are reading to Latin literature, or vice versa. If they were reading a Latin author, they would compare it to a Greek author. And of course, in the case of Homer, there were very many cross-references to Virgil and vice versa. We see the same thing. And also from this introductory oration, we know that the moral use of Homer was important. So Homer is a praise of virtue, so every Christian should read it. And this was the opinion of Basil the Great church father, who wrote in Greek about the use of reading pagan authors for Christians. So these are the things that they would say in this kind of introductory oration. Then they would summarize the text portion they were going to read. In the case of Homer, there were these Byzantine argumenta, summaries that you could use, and also these very odd hexameters which summarized the contents of a book, which we also read during the reenactment. Then the text would be read, which is in itself a kind of reenactment. And I have to stress here that this was done in the ecclesiastical pronunciation for Latin and in the vernacular pronunciation for Greek. And this is maybe also an interesting place to point out that you all know that Erasmus reconstructed the pronunciation of both Latin and Greek in a very playful dialogue. But that was never practiced at the Collegium Trilingue, at least not in the period before the 1550s or 60s. It starts to change toward the end of the 16th century. And what is more important, Erasmus himself never practiced this reconstructed pronunciation. So he followed the habitus, the usus of the day, and he used the vernacular pronunciation at a point in time when there were many, many Greeks in Italy and also the other parts of Europe who were pronouncing the Greek like that. So that's a point I want to stress here. Then, in the case of Greek, you would have a verbatim translation of the original text, for which Rescius used a recently published translation by a scholar called Andreas Divus, who was from what is present-day Slovenia, Justinopolis. I don't know if anyone knows where that is, but he identifies himself as Justinopolitanus. So he used that translation, which I also cited at the outset. And both for Latin and Greek, there would be lengthy paraphrases of the original text, both in Latin and for the Greek text also in Greek. So we see that about 10% of the student notes that we have found from this course are in Greek. So these are paraphrases offered by the professor Rescius in Greek, based on a body of scholia that was attributed at that point to the Alexandrinian grammarian Didymus, Chalcenterus, a very interesting nickname. Then after the paraphrases in Latin and Greek, then you would come to the commentary, which could be very diverse. It covers basically what we would call realia, or many of us would call realia. It regards grammatical properties of the Latin and Greek languages, lexical issues, especially in the Latin classes. There's a lot of textual interpretation going on because, of course, Latin wasn't that new at that point. They had been reading Latin in the West for many, many centuries at that point. So there was room for more literary interpretation and exegesis there. But for Greek it was much more language focused, because you couldn't really expect a very, very high level of Greek from the students who came there. Although you would have had needed a preliminary program to attend these classes as well. So I will distribute the presentation afterwards. You can click on all of these links, and these will bring you directly to the annotations that I've been talking about in the past 5 minutes or so. So it's maybe a good tool or a portal to go to our database of the Leuven Trilingue. And this would be on repeat for, forever, basically. So in daily 1-hour classes, this is also one element in the teaching method of the Collegium Trilingue. It took place every day, except for Sundays. And we know that the reading went quite slowly. For Latin, there was a lot of interpretation going on. They only did about 10 lines a day. For Greek, it went a bit faster because they were focusing more on the language than on the interpretation. That was about 20 lines a day. And maybe they did more for Greek because it was in the afternoon and not in the morning like the Latin classes. They were very early in the morning, but Greek was in the afternoon. And after that, if you were a real diehard, you could attend the Hebrew classes as well. So maybe a brief word on what the aims and challenges of the Collegium Trilingue were, in as far as we have been able to identify them based on the student notes. So it seems that the education was really up to date with the latest publications in classical literature. It was very much also research driven, using the latest tools that were available, and it was very much focused on critical text interpretation. And the humanists, like no others, they took recourse to a unique medium that was being commercialized at that point in history, the printed book. So we see that the printed book is something that is almost exclusively limited to the Collegium Trilingue. At the other faculties and colleges, dictation is the norm. So the professor would be saying stuff and everybody needed to be writing these down, these things verbatim, so word for word. This was different at the Collegium Trilingue, where you had a textbook and you could write the things down that interested you the most, basically. There was no strict dictation going on at the Collegium Trilingue. What is also interesting is that the professors would stress the undiminished actuality of the classics. So there are plenty of references to contemporary politics, habits, phenomena, and so on. So antiquity, classical literature, was really a frame of reference for their contemporary situation. For instance, I think the most interesting part is that the professor of Latin, Petrus Nannius was his name, when explaining Virgil's Aeneid, he would constantly refer to the ongoing war with the Ottomans, the threat of the Ottomans. So there was a constant point of reference, and it seems that the Aeneid helped in dealing with this threat from at the borders of the Christian world at that time. And also the moral education, which is a point that I've stressed sufficiently already. And then we see that the Collegium Trilingue aimed at an active language competence in utraque lingua. So we see that the professor offered paraphrases in the 2 languages, and we will see indeed that we have student documents showing writings both in Latin and in Greek and even poetry and so on in Latin and in Greek produced by students at the Collegium Trilingue, suggesting that in the milieu of the Collegium Trilingue, and this active approach was also being cultivated, even though it would not have been part of the teaching or classroom experience, because as you may have noticed, it was very ex cathedra. It was just a professor explaining the text without any room for interaction. So that was going on. And also, especially for Greek and Hebrew, it was really annoying not to have a blackboard or something like that, especially if you're using the vernacular pronunciation of ancient Greek. It's a bit like English, where what you hear and what you see on the paper is very different, and it's very difficult to write things down correctly if you cannot see them written down somewhere on a screen or in a book, for that matter. So, we will actually see quite a lot of student mistakes in the next slides as well. If you want to know more, there are these two very recent PhD dissertations, one focusing on Hebrew, and that's the one by Maxime Maleux. And the other one is focusing on the teaching of Virgil and Homer by Xander Vijs, which will be submitted next week. So I'm coming to my final act, which is basically an attempt at explaining what the success of the Collegium Trilingue was. I would dare to say that it was perhaps not so much the innovative method which I just described, because I don't really see to what extent that it's novel, except for the fact that new languages were added to it. And also this method of teaching in the humanist way was taking root everywhere in Europe. So perhaps the success of the Collegium Trilingue has to be explained by a combination of factors. To start with, it helped already that it was founded by someone as famous as Erasmus. But of course, there are also other elements that contributed to its success. And my main argument is maybe that it's a bit like the Villa Falconieri, in the sense that it was a locus amoenus in the town of Leuven, which was a very conservative theological bulwark, where there was not a lot of room for intellectual freedom and so on. And this was a kind of safe haven where that could happen, and you could feed both your mind but also your body there. So for instance, if you went to the Collegium Trilingue, you were able to sit on a bench. That was quite exceptional in that period. In the 16th century, at most faculties, at most colleges, you had to sit on the ground. So that's already an upgrade. They were playing ball games, which led to complaints by neighbors because occasionally windows were being broken. The food was also delicious. It was near the fish market, so much fish was consumed there. And during the meals, they had to speak Latin, so that's also a part of the method, I would say, even though it's not strictly the classroom, of course. And I dare to say they would code switch to Greek and Hebrew as well, as they were talking about the good food they were consuming. And next to the corpus, also the mains got its nourishment at the Collegium Trilingue. I've talked a lot already about the moral virtue, but perhaps curiosity may be the most important driving force at the Collegium Trilingue, where languages old and at the same time new or renewed were opening up a new world of knowledge that trumped medieval forms of knowledge, which were too concerned with very specific theological problems, or at least in the perception of the humanists. The humanists, they were more interested in the big questions again about human life and its origin and also even its future. They also had an enormous admiration, of course, for the ancients, but at the same time they critically engaged with their ideas, and because they realized that these ideas stemmed from a very different world, and they also understood that sometimes they made mistakes. So this critical attitude towards these sources is also linked to this curiosity, which was connected also to what I would call a relative intellectual liberty, certainly for that age. Because you have to remember, it's also the age of the Reformation. The Protestantism is dividing Europe. And Leuven was firmly in the Catholic side of history. But there was this Collegium Trilingue where they were reading Melanchthon and other Protestant authors like Konrad Gessner. They weren't bragging about it, as you can understand, but we have evidence from the student notes that these authors were being used, even though they are never mentioned. So this is also an aspect of this liberty. And there was also a good deal of fun to be had at the Collegium Trilingue, which also was an important ingredient of the success of this Collegium Trilingue, I would say. And the result is that there was a positive and open atmosphere, which even had a lot of student solidarity going on. So I will focus now on the curiosity, the liberty, and the fun, because we have talked already a lot about, to some extent a bit about, the moral virtue. So, curiosity, we see that but it manifested itself in different ways and in different disciplines. I won't go into much detail, but we see that in the environment of the Collegium Trilingue, the interest of the students and the professors goes way beyond the 3 languages studied there. We see that pupils and professors there are studying Aramaic, Syriac, Arabic, and even forms of Ethiopic like Ge'ez and Amharic, but also vernacular languages are being studied, Dutch, German. There was even a chair of French added to the Collegium Trilingue at some point in history. Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, vernacular Greek was also studied there. Rutgerescu, the professor of Greek, owned some vernacular Greek books. And I would dare to argue that this Collegium Trilingue led to a kind of diversification of the curriculum, not only in terms of language, but also offering a window on different cultures, Orthodox Greek culture, Jewish culture, Arabic culture, and so on. So this is again this relative open-mindedness compared to, at least for that day and age. I've said that you could attend the classes freely at the Collegium Trilingue, but of course this was only for mostly white boys and men. I have to be honest about that. Women weren't allowed at the university. That was a more general trend, with very few exceptions, like Anna Maria van Schuurman in the 17th century in Utrecht then. And also this curiosity about language led to what may be called linguistics avant la lettre. They were interested in the etymologies of words. Petrus Nannius, the Latin professor, even was writing about the etymology of the Dutch word of kerk, church, which was derived from a Greek word for church, of course, from the Greek word for Lord, as you will know. And also, what is perhaps most interesting is that Johannes Goropius Becanus was a student of the Collegium Trilingue, and he dared to dethrone Hebrew as the lingua adamica. So at that point, everybody thought Hebrew is the language of God, the language of the first human, Adam. But he came up with a very daring proposal. He suggested that it was Dutch. So it's a very well-known figure or at least he has a bad reputation in the history of linguistics. But in fact, he was very important in opening up the debate about linguistic diversity and language origin. And by opening up the debates, there was an opening for the Scythian hypothesis. And this was actually the precursor of the Indo-European hypothesis that all languages stem from this Indo-European common ancestor. So it started with something ridiculous, but it turned out to be scientifically very useful. And that started at the Collegium Trilingue as well. Then next to language and human origin and diversity, there's also the human body. A tremendous curiosity about that. Then I have to mention Andreas Vesalius, who was active in trilingual milieus in the 1530s and who developed an interest in ancient medical literature, especially for the anatomy of the human body. And Vesalius was reading Galen while he was dissecting bodies, and at the same time he was questioning his findings, because Galen had only dissected, I think, monkeys and pigs, but he was actually working on actual humans. So he was in fact giving a kind of empirical twist to the idea that Erasmus had of going ad fontes. So you had to look with your own eyes what is true and what is not. And that is something that also seems to have flowed from this attitude promoted at the Collegium Trilingue. And Vesalius even published his first work with the professor of Greek, Rutger Rescius, which was a paraphrasis, kind of translation of an Arabic work, originally Arabic work, but he translated it from a Greek version. And I could give other examples. I won't dwell on this one too much, but there were also scholars interested in Earth and the cosmos, Gerardus Mercator and Gemma Frisius. They were trying to map the world, and they were also involved at the Collegium Trilingue and its professors. So in a word, I would say that empirical research was boosted by this language institute, and if I'm in a bold mood, I sometimes dare to say that the Collegium Trilingue was therefore the MIT of the 16th century, but we can agree to disagree on that if you don't like that. Then at the Collegium Trilingue, you also had the liberty to attend the classes. You weren't forced to go, that's one thing. You could follow your interests. And I've also already pointed out that there was no dictation going on. And we can prove that by comparing parallel sets of notes that we have found from the same class. And we see that every student takes the liberty of writing down what he wants. So one student was more interested in the adagium being cited by the professor than the other two, who just gave a vague reference to it. But in many cases, we see that one student notes something down which the two others don't note down. So it's really there's no professorial control at all. There were also no exams to take there, so it was really just you wanting to be there at the Collegium Trilingue. So maybe that's also a takeaway for the teachers here. Making the students want to be there helps a lot. And what do we also see? That there was a kind of student solidarity going on at the Collegium Trilingue. They perceived themselves as being together in the classroom, reading the Greek words in this passage, emis gometa, is glossed in Latin as conveniebamus, so it's a literal translation. We were coming together, and then the student added ut nos nunc, like we are coming together now to read Homer. So this is the sense of a group, and we see a very, very interesting piece of evidence for this as well in this slide. So maybe take some time to look at the three images. They are taken from three different students' copies of the textbook they used, but something is going on. Maybe someone notices what is going on with the Greek text in one of the three images. Yeah, you can speak up. The scansion, you say? Maybe I haven't thought about that. It's mainly the top one that you need to look at. Something is going on there. Professor Rescius was a printer, but not always that diligent. If you look at the bottom line in Greek, it's not printed. It's handwritten because the ink didn't come through. So the student mimicked the words from another student's copy. So he's also really trying to, with a shaky hand at some point, to copy what is there in the printed edition as well. So that's student solidarity in action on a micro level, I would say, but I thought it was a nice example. Then I also said that there was not a lot of professorial control. There are some downsides to liberty, that the knowledge transfer is not always working. It's not always effective. For instance, the first word, what is that, do you think? Aletos, indeed, so it's a Yotticism coming through. The second word is a bit more difficult. I read something incorrect at first when I looked at this. You can shout. What? Huan, that's also how I read it, but it's Luan. it's an accent, actually, the thing above the upsilon, it's an accent, not part of the lambda. So it's lian, basically. So again, a ioticist mistake. And then the third one, choris, what is that? Choris, indeed, with a chi and with an omega. So you can really see the oral nature of the teaching at work here, and there's no attempt at correcting these notes at all, which sometimes happened, but apparently this student wasn't that diligent to revisit his notes after class. And there's another cute example. I will only take the bottom one. So in this passage, the Greek word amindoras was being discussed, and he was first giving a Greek paraphrase synonym, voitus, which he wrote down with a mistake, so not a theta, but a tau, as you can see, and without an accent for that matter. And then he gave a Latin translation of the Greek synonym. But the student only realized halfway through that it was Latin that the teacher had switched to, so the first part of the word is still in Greek alphabet, auxiliatores. And if I need to stop, you can just indicate it to me, because otherwise I will take the liberty of talking an hour, as was the habit at the Collegium Trilingue. And the third and final ingredient I want to point out is that there was a lot of fun going on as well, especially the classes of the Latin professor Petrus Nanius must have been quite a thing. We know that his performance of Virgil's poetry was very lively, so he was really reenacting the poetry of Virgil. And a very nice example is this. It's about the word dictamnum or dictamnus, which is a kind of oregano, dittany, that grows in Crete and has medical qualities. And he has a lengthy digression in the classroom about the meaning of this word, and also about the medicinal qualities of this plant. So we're now in the classroom of 1549. It's about Virgil's Aeneid, the final book. At the end of this lengthy digression, he says the following: Tante mollis erat unicam dictionem explicare. Does anyone get the Virgilian pun here? Romanam condere gentem. Yes, that's right, indeed. So he's adopting an epic register to talk about explaining a word in the classroom context. But at the same time, he's doing this out of a kind of solidarity, in the sense that he's saving his students a trip to the library, because he's explaining the word and citing 3 very recent publications about the Latin language or about botany to support his point. And then some niceties. Sometimes you really have to look good for the fun. This is an Hebrew example, but this student was apparently distracted during the classroom because he drew an emoticon inside the meme, as you can see. And also outside of the classroom, a lot of fun was going on with Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. It was used as a code language as well, sometimes, for instance, by Johannes Heliares. Does anyone see which language was being written down in the Greek alphabet to hide some bills that he still needed to pay to some fellow students? It's English, yeah, it's English. There was 40 shilling for the fine unpaid, and of the old account also 2 geldings and 1 mare. So he used both Greek and also Hebrew, by the way, to keep his accounts in his notebook. This Johannes Heliaris, an English priest called John Heliar in the vernacular. Also, Greek was being used as a kind of code language when you had to talk about sensitive topics. Here, Professor Petrus Nanius is gossiping about the mental health of his Hebrew professor, of his colleague on the Hebrew chair, Andreas Balenus, and he's saying that he suffers from micropsychia and also from thanatophobia. small soul syndrome, fear of death syndrome, of simply thanatophobia, which may be diagnosed retrospectively as depression or something. But in any case, Greek was an interesting code to hide this sensitive information about a colleague, but also at the same time it was the language of medicine, so it was also the jargon perhaps that he was thinking of, even though the second word is something that he has invented, and the first one is indeed an ancient Greek word, but it's never used in any medical sense before this attestation. And a final indication of the fun is that they were also writing in both Latin and in Greek. For instance, when the founder, the intellectual founder of the Collegium Trilingue died, Erasmus, students were composing Latin and Greek epitaphs for him and playing with words. For instance, the term cosmos and its a double meaning of jewel and cosmos was being punned on in one of the Greek poems by the same John Heliar, the priest whose notebook I just showed. And the poem on the right-hand side is a kind of macaronic epitaph combining a Latin hexameter with a Greek pentameter, as you can see. And this is, by the way, included in the Greek anthology that Professor Laes mentioned at the when he was introducing me. So, what do I want you to remember from what I've been ranting about for the past 40 minutes? So mainly the Trilingue was a horizon-widening language bath where daily study happened, a critical attitude towards sources, but also phenomena in the real world was trained with a good sauce of moral virtue. And there was a very open atmosphere which stimulated curiosity and solidarity, and it also had a good portion of liberty and humor going on. And if I may appeal to your solidarity, we have a citizen science challenge going on because we're trying to make a corpus of the opera omnia of Erasmus of Rotterdam, and we need your help because we're only 5 people and we can't do it on our own. And as you may know, he wrote many works, many volumes. So if you want, help us in correcting the text, because we are using the beast called artificial intelligence to help us. So we are basically asking an AI, an OCR model to transcribe the text, but of course it's never perfect. So we still need human intelligence very much to check everything and to help us correct the texts. So if you are interested, check out the website. The program is mainly in Dutch, but we can also facilitate an English trajectory. If you are interested, any help is welcome. The Scola Nova is probably also interested in cooperating. So get in touch if you're grasped or if your interest is aroused by this project, and we will gladly see what is possible for you and or your students. So thanks for listening to me, and I hope you got something out of it.
Thank you, Raf, for such a wonderful talk, fascinating subject, and for being so practical also. I was wondering about the issue of when we discuss agency of students and of teachers, about the issue of authority. Yeah? So the professor is just sitting there dictating things. How easily could these people get away with something? Yeah? But when you make, nowadays, when you make a mistake during teaching, of course, students could correct you, they could look it up, they could say, this is not right. And if you said, I haven't said so, it would have been recorded often. So there would be recordings of your teaching, so everyone can. While in those days, first of all, I guess no questions were asked, no one dared to correct the professors, so you could sort of get away with it. Not to mention, do you know, by the way, when people started to use Blackboard?
It was starting in the 16th century, but mainly in musical education. That's where it started. But it was never used in the 16th century at the Collegium Trilingue.
Yeah. And do we know how they learned how to write Greek and Hebrew?
For Hebrew, there are some indications. So we see that the students are still shaky in their early hand in the annotations, but yeah, that's the closest that we can get. We don't really have sheets of paper with aleph and bets and so on going across the line, but.
And were there any diplomas or certificates or anything, or degrees? Because you mentioned no examinations.
Unfortunately not. That's also a great frustration for us historians of the Trilingue, because we can barely say with any certainty who studied there, because you didn't have to enroll. For instance, Andreas Vesalius, I've mentioned him, but for some that's a bit controversial because there's no indication that he actually attended the classes, but he certainly knew the professor of Greek, he was working closely with him, and so on.
Okay. Well, this is fascinating. So you could just say, I was a student there, and that's it.
Yeah, and we noticed that the average student was older than the starting student. So you would be 14 years old when you went to the university back then, but the average age, as far as we can grasp from the data that we have, was around 20 for the Collegium Trilingue.
And professors were just appointed by reputation, or also not based on a degree or
by reputation or by lack of any alternatives. The professor of Greek, the first one, Rutgerescus, was just, because he was there and the only one who was able to do, because Erasmus actually wanted a Greek from Byzantium. He wanted Janus Laskaris, but there was miscommunication between them. Erasmus basically sent a letter to the wrong place, where Laskaris was no longer available. So
Okay, can I just ask Christophe to sit in front together with Raf, because there's still, I guess there's 10 minutes left for discussion or questions. So whatever you would like to ask to one of our speakers. I also wanted to thank Christophe again for being so practical too. If you think about just going to Greece, asking when does the ship arrive, when does it leave, where do I buy my ticket, how much does it cost? These are things we all recognize, isn't it? Or same with a train somewhere, taking a train and then well, these sequences. I think that was also very practical. So, whoever wants may ask a question now, either in French or in English or in another language. I think we'll get away with that. Weber? Just take the microphone for...
I want to know, is the book still available? Can I buy it? Can I command it?
Yes, the book, either in Greek or Latin, is available on Amazon. Yeah,
Thank you.
You will find it.
Je m'adresse au professeur Rico avec reconnaissance pour son magistral exposé qui a eu la clarté absolument nécessaire pour tout un bon entendement. Nous sommes ici des gens qui parlons des langues différentes et alors il faut vraiment être très clair pour arriver aux personnages qui nous écoutent. Ce que je voulais vous demander, c'est si cette méthode du professeur Coin qui parle de ces séquences, qui découpent le discours en séquences non interchangeables, parce que je ne peux pas descendre du bus avant d'avoir monté du bus, etc., ne vous rappelle pas une autre méthode, une autre façon d'aborder non pas la phrase, mais la structure de la narration. Je veux parler de Vladimir Yakovlevitch Prop et de sa morphologie du conte qui fait une chose similaire au niveau de la narration et qui, je pense, a révolutionné notre façon de regarder le texte, ainsi que, j'espère, la méthode Coin a révolutionné la pensée du 19e siècle. Il était vraiment, je pense, un précurseur.
Oui, c'est une excellente question. Donc, effectivement, il y a un lien entre la narration, telle que Prop l'a décrite, et l'expression vivante séquentielle. En fait, chacun des exemples que donne Gouin, ou ceux que nous avons essayé de développer, c'est comme une micro-narration. De ce point de vue-là, vous avez entièrement raison. Et c'est quelque chose qui aide le développement de la narration, la capacité de raconter quelque chose dans la langue. J'ajouterai que François Gouin est très peu connu. Il a eu son heure de gloire à la fin du XIXe siècle. Il est plus connu dans le monde anglo-saxon que dans le monde francophone. Et il commence à être redécouvert maintenant, à présent. Merci.
Merci pour cette question qui illustre de nouveau ce principe de nova et vetera. Donc c'est toujours des vieilles méthodes qui reviennent ou qui sont d'une manière réinventées. Merci beaucoup. Quelqu'un d'autre? Other question?
Ça va un peu dans le même sens. En écoutant la théorie de la séquence, ça m'a beaucoup convaincu, mais j'ai pensé à Aristote. Ce que vous racontez au niveau du style, c'est la lexis eiromene, c'est le style catalogal. Mais qu'est-ce que vous faites de la lexis catestramene? Est-ce qu'on pourrait pas apprendre la même chose avec un modèle circulaire, par exemple?
Oui, pour le discours, vous dites pour le discours surtout? Parce que par définition, la narration est linéaire. Enfin, il peut y avoir des narrations circulaires, mais le propre d'une narration, c'est d'avancer.
J'ai pensé au fait qu'à la fin du 19e, on a les premiers développements du style formulaire.
Oui.
Aussi d'Homère. Homère, vous ne le faites pas avec la lexis eiromene.
Oui.
Là, il y a les structures annulaires, il y a Démosthène.
Oui.
Il faut
alors,
quelque chose de circulaire.
C'est une question très intéressante. C'est-à-dire, d'une part, je pense quand même qu'Homère, même s'il y a effectivement le style formulaire, c'est un récit. Il y a un développement dans les chants de la colère d'Achille, et on arrive vers un dénouement. Donc il y a véritablement une évolution. Alors effectivement, ensuite, il y a le style formulaire, il y a des formules qui reviennent constamment. Mais au niveau des éléments de la narration, je pense que dans le cas d'Homère, on a quand même un développement linéaire pour ce qui est de la narration, mais pas pour les formules qui effectivement reviennent constamment et qui permettent alors aux rhapsodes de mémoriser facilement des textes. En revanche, pour Démosthène, là oui, parce que c'est l'orateur. Donc là, il y a effectivement, on peut avoir quelque chose de circulaire ou un approfondissement. Alors effectivement, c'est une très bonne idée. J'y avais pas pensé. Je devrais réfléchir à l'idée que vous proposez. Je crois qu'elle serait surtout applicable, par exemple, à la méditation. Quand il y a un texte qui est une méditation où on a une idée sur laquelle on revient, puis on revient une deuxième fois, puis on revient une troisième fois. Dans beaucoup de textes en hébreu, on a ça. Donc là, effectivement, ça serait une autre façon de faire. Et il y aurait peut-être quelque chose à développer. J'y ai pas du tout pensé. C'est une très bonne idée. Et merci pour votre suggestion.
Merci beaucoup. On a encore le temps pour une seule question, peut-être. Oui, pour vous.
Thank you for your interesting speeches. I have a question about the Collegium Trilingue. So, oh, sorry, excuse me. So, as you mentioned, 3 languages were taught there, and one cannot escape noticing that 2 of them, which are the Greek and Latin languages, are historically and linguistically connected to each other, so it's easy to move from one language to another, to translate, because they share many words, the grammatical structure, while the Hebrew language is different linguistically. It belongs to another family. It has a different writing system. I noticed that they didn't use vowel points. I don't know if it was the case of a particular manuscript or it was the general rule. So my question would be, how did they harmonize teaching Hebrew along with these Indo-European languages, and how easy, or how challenging, I should say, was for the teachers and students to go from one language to another or translate? Thank you.
Thank you for this. Thank you for this most interesting question. I don't know whether it's working, but yes, okay. So yeah, that was a challenge, incorporating Hebrew. We see that most students stopped at Latin and Greek, basically. So the audience was a bit different for both, for Hebrew as opposed to Latin and Greek. Also, the level was a bit lower, because you didn't really have any institutions that could prepare you to study Hebrew, so they were starting with grammar alongside the reading of Psalms, which were texts that most students would know by heart in the 16th century context, at least in their Latin Vulgate version. So it was a much more basic approach to Hebrew. We see that they don't really use the Hebrew grammatical tradition, because there is an indigenous Jewish tradition of doing Hebrew grammar with 3 parts of speech and so on, but they were trying to bring it closer to Latin and Greek, so they were inventing, or at least applying, categories like the article to Hebrew as well, which Greek had. Latin didn't have, but in the perception of the humanists, Latin did have an article, but that's another discussion. So we do see that in terms of grammatical theory and so on, they are applying what they knew from Latin and Greek to Hebrew. So in that sense, they were trying to bring it closer, while inevitably noticing that Hebrew was sui generis compared to all the languages that they were being confronted with at that point. So that was a challenge for them. And about the vowel points, in the student manuscripts we see that they are added, but typically the editions don't have them. So, and in the notes that we have edited by a certain student called Adrianus Vossius from Ghent, he sometimes adds these vowel marks and even cantillation marks as well, as indications of how they should be pronounced and sung and so on. So those were being taught as part of the grammar as well. I hope I answered your question.
This was, of course, a question coming from a speaker from another very different and difficult language, being Georgian. Thank you so much for this. I'm glad to see that we managed to stick to our time, so I think it's about time for il pranzo now, for lunch, so I'll give the, okay, just downstairs. It's downstairs like yesterday. Okay, yeah, would you like to say something about the afternoon program? So then, yep. Yeah.
At 3:30 we'll start again. Yeah, we'll start again at 3:30, and so after the lunch we'll have a little break, and then at 3:30 we will be here again.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.